Here we go. Okay.
Okay, awesome. So I know there are quite a few people who come to these who are fairly new, and that we have a steady inflow from people who've just done IQ. So I want to give a little bit more contextualization before I jump into something quite as profound as the heart wounds and the lost childhood message. So firstly, just to give you a metaphor that I find very, very powerful for what the Enneagram is really about. And some of you who've been on my trainings and courses will know this metaphor very well. And if you've been exposed to the work of Tom Condon, because that's where I plagiarized it from. So he uses this metaphor of maps. And he says that when we are little tiny kids, we formulate a map of reality. And that includes our way of making sense of the world from the head center, our sense of our heart connection and belonging as a human being within the human family, and our sense of, love and our relationship with our own feeling center. And then we've got our action center. So our maps include all of those components, and that's our childhood reality strategy. That's his other metaphor, is a map. And these maps become very outdated as we grow up. And we're still navigating the world using these maps into adulthood. So I like to sometimes think, if you look around a boardroom table, what you're actually looking at is the sandpit at nursery school, because people are bringing their early childhood issues into that room. And all of us have unresolved issues. We're not completely conscious. And so, what we're trying to do with the Enneagram work is to update our map and to make it more current so that we can respond with more objectivity to the present moment. So, you can see that this is an award winning map from about 2017, the one on the right. So, that for me is a metaphor for objectivity. It's got a whole lot more precision. It's got a whole lot more clarity. It would include a whole lot more features if you zoomed in. You could probably zoom into street level. So, what we're trying to do is give up our medieval map of the world, our childhood map, which has all kinds of dragons and monsters on it and lots of inaccuracies, to something that allows us to have a more objective perception of the world. So that's really one of the purposes of working with the Enneagram. That isn't always articulated, because sometimes we see it as like a personality description tool, like almost like a psychometric tool. And I think it's really not that. I want to put this up because this is where we go when we work with the Enneagram. So we become aware of our maps and what the underlying motivations are behind those maps and where they came from. And then as we ease out those and we start.
Ingrid, would it be possible you to move to presentation mode to
Yeah, I'm going to
maybe
do
make
that
the font just
now. So when we work with the Enneagram in a very deliberate, conscious, and intentional way, what we start experiencing is the virtues, which is the heart quality. It's the emotional experience of each type. So if you find your type in this table and you look at the description here of your virtue for your type, what the Enneagram allows us to do is to gradually have this experience more of the time. So you might be able to recognize this virtue and think, yeah, I had that when I was in the mountain in Lesotho in 1989. But when you've worked with the Enneagram, you start being able to say, well, most of Tuesday I felt like that. And then most of the week I felt like that. So you start finding this virtue arising in your heart as an emotional experience that brings a lot of ease. So So that's what we're up to here. We're looking at cultivating the virtue and living a better life and feeling a lot better day to day. So I'm going to give you a second to just read your virtue and think about when last did you deeply feel this. And I know that you did, because every type has intrinsic access to their virtue and is a channel for their virtue. So think about the last time you felt it. And see if you can get yourself into that experience of the virtue again in this moment by remembering it. Okay, so that's what we're up to here. We're not describing personality types. We're doing much more than that. And we're looking to care for our own souls in a much better way. If you're selling the Enneagram in a corporate environment, then you're probably talking about EQ. Like, how do we enhance EQ? And these are the dimensions of EQ from Daniel Goleman, you know, the sub-constructs within the idea of EQ. So it's about better self-regulation, etc., etc. I'm sure many of you teach EQ and are experts in it. So I'm not going to go into that, but I want to share these slides with you afterwards, so that when you are teaching the Enneagram and taking it into corporate environments, that you can put this in front of potential clients and say the Enneagram is going to help you to develop these qualities in leaders and in teams. And I find that people really like this. And if you put it up in front of a team at the beginning of a session and you say, this is why we're doing this work today, you're going to walk away with more of this. And then you can let them self-assess against this and say, okay, when you look at this, where do you feel that you're really strong? And where do you feel you've got some gaps? So that can set the tone for some of this work. And I find that people really enjoy that exercise. Okay, and what we're also aiming for is to create spaciousness. So this links very closely with the idea of the map. Here, the metaphor is loops of the past. So it's almost like your old algorithms that are just running and running. You're on autopilot. Gurdjieff uses that metaphor of the mechanical ego. So what we're trying to do is have different pathways available to us. And that means becoming intimate with the present moment so that we can be responsive. We're not stuck in a particular stance. There's more fluidity. So this is another way of articulating what we're trying to do here. It's spaciousness out of the loops of the past, out of our fantasies and fears and projections of what the future is, to be able to be in the moment here and now, and to notice what's available in that moment. There's an infinite range of possibilities available to us. And when we are conscious and present, we become aware of what's there. And this is the real beauty of it. And I like to talk about this forthrightness from within. I think I might have stolen that from Wendy Palmer. But for me, this is like a love of truth. And it's the truth of love as well, is being able to stand one's ground with a profound confidence based in the truth of one's own heart, and be able to act from that place and be honest. So this is really what I think is going on with the Enneagram, and how I work with it, and how I teach it, and how I work with it with leaders. This is what we do. So I generally find it lands well. And then what we're going to do is, as we go, be thinking about what is the quality of thinking that I want to bring to my life based on what I learn in these kinds of sessions. So when we learn stuff from the Enneagram, to then apply it, like, What am I going to notice about my thinking? What am I going to notice about my own quality of presence from a heart center perspective? So I didn't put a picture in here of a loving couple or a team or any of that stuff. I put in a picture of a person alone, because the feeling center is very much concerned with our relationship with our own feeling life. And so that's why I've got a person standing alone there, because they're not in the grip of any sense of what other people think about them. They're in themselves. And then in the action center, the red here, I've put flow. The metaphor is flow. So when we are present in the moment, we are in flow. We're not stuck in a stance. We're not stuck in our ego fixation. We're able to flow with the moment with a lot of sensitivity and responsivity. So just to have this in the back of your mind, and I want to come back to the slide at the end if we've got time, and give everyone an opportunity to think, okay, on the basis of what I've encountered today, what does that mean for my thinking, my feeling, and my action? So, and those three need to be integrated around a core truth. If anyone wants to stop me and clarify anything, just wave, and maybe Renata, you'll pick it up, because I've only got the panel of people down the side.
Ingrid,
Okay.
could you, Ingrid, sorry.
Yeah.
The heart message, I was still orientating myself to your slides. What was your heart message there?
This one.
Yes.
What I was saying is I didn't put a picture in of a loving couple or a team or a group of people. So the feeling center is very much connected with our humanity and belonging and connections. But I've put a single person in here for a reason. And that is that our feeling center is also very much concerned with our relationship to our own feelings and our own heart. And that's what this image is intended to highlight. So this person is standing on the beach, and they're not fixated with what other people think of them. They're not trying to help anybody as a 2. They're not trying to have an image as a 3. And they're not necessarily in the depths of being caught in the melancholy of a 4. Maybe, but I would like to think that a person standing looking at the ocean in that way is feeling present and connected with an open and clear heart. So that's basically what that image is representing here. The mental one, head center, is the Zen garden of a clear mind, that kind of witnessing consciousness in which things arise in their own place, not caught in rumination and planning and anxiety. It's clarity. And then in the action center, it's that flow in the moment. So this is part of what I'm thinking we're kind of working towards this in the Enneagram work as well.
Thank you
Is
for
that
that.
okay?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. So what we're doing with the heart wounds and the lost childhood messages work is we are going into shadow elements of ourselves. It's difficult stuff. It's hard to face. We are going to be surfacing childhood trauma when we do this work. And it's very, very sensitive work. So if you're going to do this work with clients, you need to be able to hold whatever arises. And if you don't feel equipped to do it, then wait in your Enneagram work until you do, or give the client the information and let them go away and process it, so that when they come back, they can reflect with you, depending on whether or not you're able to hold intense feeling in a session. If you're not a very experienced coach, you might not feel that you can deal with that. You know, if you're more kind of coaching them around business performance. So just be aware of that. This is that kind of territory. Okay, and every single time I do anything with the Enneagram, it's about self-compassion, and Thich Nhat Hanh says self-mercy. So we're not here to panel beat the ego. We're not here to give people advice on how to behave differently. and to use the ego to bash the ego, like Enneagram 1s do. They're very good at it. They then start apologizing for self-criticism. So they use the Enneagram 1 to smash the Enneagram 1. Doesn't work. What we're doing is compassionately self-observing, and this is a big thing within the Enneagram. If you haven't come across it yet, it's really the essence of a lot of the Enneagram work is cultivating the inner observer. So that's how Helen Palmer talks about it. She says what we're doing is moving into experiencing the world from the place of the witnessing consciousness. So being less trapped in our thoughts, being able to self-distantiate and say, oh, look, I'm caught in that compulsive loop. I've been thinking about that all day. So it's noticing your thoughts, noticing your feelings. So this is where we observe from. And this inner witnessing consciousness is very still. There's equanimity, there's non-attachment. We are able to observe this whole thing with complete non-judgment. So if you're judging yourself, you need to take a step back into the witnessing consciousness so that you can observe your whole ego pattern playing out with self-mercy and self-compassion. If you experience self-judgment and that harshness, you know that it's your superego talking. And one of the very first things we need to do in Enneagram work is disidentify from the superego, because the superego is one of the things that keeps the whole pattern running. It's very, very important. The witnessing consciousness is not the superego. Okay. So what this slide I've tried to represent here is if we in that witnessing consciousness, we're based in it, then what we're trying to do is see all the way to the root of what's going on with us, where our fixations arise. So one of the first things that we can do is start thinking and looking at the heart wound and the lost childhood messages. So from within, you're going to see today when you're exposed to this information, you're going to start realizing, oh, my defense mechanisms are defending against that. My defense mechanisms are defending against me really getting a clear sense of what my subtype is doing. My subtype is masking a whole lot of other stuff. So there are other things that are keeping all of this in place and blinding me to the unconscious impulses that are driving my behavior. Then we get to the fixation. Then we start understanding the vice. And then we start understanding right beneath that how the vice is fueled by an instinctual glitch. So I know this is like deep end Enneagram stuff. If you are more advanced in the Enneagram, you're probably going to have a much clearer sense of what it means. But what I'm doing is kind of mapping the ecostructure from the perspective of the witnessing consciousness. Like, what can we see in what order? So it's not easy for us to see the vice. You think about it. When you first heard the word pride as a 2, it's like, what? What are you talking about? It's really, really difficult to understand the vice when you first encounter the Enneagram. It's like gluttony. Are you mad? I forget to eat for a whole day. You don't understand the vice until you've seen your way through these other layers. So this is the point I'm making today, is why it's so helpful to start with the heart wound and the lost childhood message, because it shows us where our type started. And it then gives us this perspective on all the other ego patterns and structures. Is this making sense?
Ingrid, this is Chris. I've got a question.
Sure. I just want to put gallery on so I can see you.
If you were, I'm not quite sure how to ask it, is it easier to start from the outside and work inwards, or to start from the inner observer position and work outwards? Because my sense is, once you see what the vice is, you can then work downwards with your fixation, your subtype, etc., my sense is it would be more challenging to start with the heart wound because there's going to be more trauma associated with that.
I think I just have experienced in my work with people that the biggest shift comes when you start with the heart wound and you look at, you've got this reality strategy. It's absolutely brilliant. This type 8 has made you this leader of this massive organization. And that's incredible. I mean, what an achievement to go from being a helpless infant to managing a giant organization. There's a genius in that reality strategy and each tri-type element coming together. I mean, these survival suits, our ego strategies are a work of complete genius. But then going to validate that, but then to say, okay, this is one particular strategy, and there are traumas behind the fact that this is the one and only strategy that you use. And let's look at how it came into being, because everybody experiences deficits in their nurturing in early childhood, even if it's because your mom took 10 minutes too long to come and give you the bottle when you're standing screaming in your cot. An infant experiences that as a life or death situation. And an ego strategy is going to kick in on the basis of those kinds of, we can call them micro wounds, we can call it everyday trauma. There's different terminology for it. But I really think starting with an understanding that our entire life strategy is based on very early childhood experiences, object relations, is very, very beneficial. And you don't necessarily need to go into the content of the trauma in a coaching session at all. You don't need to start asking the details or getting someone to talk about the specific experiences of sexual violence or neglect or whatever it is. But you can talk about the fact that, say, the 8th heart wound is the dying heart, and this is how it arose. 8s experienced a sense of betrayal and injustice in their very early childhood. You can say that to them and let them think about it. You don't have to do psychotherapy, and if you're not a therapist, please don't. But I think I'm just reiterating the point that for people to reflect on, yes, that is why this ego strategy developed. It gives them an opportunity to loosen it and to understand the way in which the defense mechanism is protecting, or has been their whole life, protecting them from really looking at that. Does that answer your question, Chris, or have I just said more of the same without answering you?
You've helped. I think the question that's sort of reformulating itself for me is how easy, for example, would it be for more of a head type to actually go in at that level? So do you need to, depending on the type, so for a 4, I would happily jump straight into the heart wound and have that conversation. But I'm imagining for, an 8, that might be a bit more of a stretch. So I'm wondering what the entry point is, I think.
I think my entry point would be saying, this is how the Enneagram works. It's about exploring where our reality strategies emerged from, and it's got certain theories about how our personalities develop. So putting it in front of them provisionally and saying, have a look at this and see what resonates for you. 6s generally experience fear in early childhood, which makes them develop this kind of thing. And give them space. And I think that applies to every type, really. And also, we don't want to intrude on people's worlds. I mean, it depends what type of coach you are. But I like to offer the Enneagram as provisional. So not to say to people, this is the answer and this is who you are, but this is what the Enneagram offers, and see what you resonate with, because tests are often wrong. Sometimes it takes people 4 or 5 years to actually land on their type. So offer it to them as an interpretive framework and say, have a look at this. You came out as a 6. This is how the kind of 6 theory goes. And, does that resonate? Does that help? Okay.
Great, thanks.
Cool. Okay, good. I'm glad I was able to hopefully understand your question a bit. Okay, so I took my screen off share, and I would like to now get into what these heart wounds are. Okay. I'm going to go back to share. Okay. So is the font big enough for me to leave it on this size view? Okay, cool. I like to be able to see where my other slides are because I jump between them. Okay, so these are the heart wounds for each of the types. And we'll go around them from the 8 all the way around. And I'm going to call in Renata every now and then because she was with me when we worked through the Russ Hudson Experiential Depth and Jessica Dibb's course, where basically I got this material from. So Renata, I'll just call in and you can just interrupt me and say I'm missing something and you want to give examples or whatever. Is that cool? Okay, great.
Absolutely. And Getty's also here, Getty, so you can also pipe up.
Great, great. So I can't see you, Getty, in the way I've got the screen set up. So just wave or whatever you have to do. Okay, so let's start with the dying heart of 8. Now, what on earth does dying heart mean? If you want to think about the experience of the dying heart, think about a moment in which you discovered that someone had lied to you or betrayed you. Think about the quality of what happened in your heart center when you experienced that. Or you can think of a moment in which you witnessed extreme injustice, unfairness, violence. And remember what happened in your heart. And the way that Sandra Maitre describes this is suddenly all the color drains from your heart. It's like the life force itself just drains because of the trauma of experiencing this. So that's the heart wound of the dying heart, is that early childhood experience of either betrayal or witnessing betrayal and injustice. That's what happens. We're going to go into how that then informs the message and some of the ego strategy. So I'm going to talk through these briefly so you have a sense. Okay. The shattered heart for 9 is the experience of landing up on this planet as an infant and discovering the level of conflict that's here, the disharmony, the brokenness of the world. So it might be a highly conflictual family where there's conflict between the parents, but it's a sense that one's context is unsafe. So it might be the immediate context, the household, it might be the broader environment, but there's a sense of brokenness and that there's this disconnection. So that's the shattered heart. So I hope that makes sense. Give yourself a moment to think about that. It's almost, if you imagine yourself caught in like a city that's being bombarded in a civil war. There's that sense of wrongness, that this is just unbearable, that this world is so radical and hectic and full of suffering and pain. And it's just that, it's almost like you want to take shelter from that complete bombardment that exists on this earth. So that's the shattered heart. Is there anything you want to add there, Renata?
No, just the metaphor of shattering is so powerful in that, when something shatters, it's not just a broken heart, which is what we understand as a grief-stricken heart. When we're broken-hearted, it's a sadness. Shattered is a million little pieces that you can't. It's so broken that you can't put it back together again. It's such an obliteration. Yeah.
And there, what I'm also hearing that was missing from what I said that you bring out is like when your heart is shattered, you almost can't feel. And you know how nines bury their feelings at the bottom of the sea, that's part of it. And often we don't appreciate the kind of pain that nines are carrying because they make themselves so invisible. So I think bearing this in mind is quite helpful. Okay, let's go to the...
I know. Sorry, Inga, I said I know you're going to get into how it manifests, but it just had such a beautiful, a simple example in this past week of a 9 who's a psychotherapist. So he really gets all of this, but the inability even to return something to a store, even because he bought the wrong thing or because it's defective, even if it's expensive and he's paid for it and he's brought it home and there's something wrong with it, he can't return it to the store. So that level of like, almost like I'm so fragile that I don't even want to have to explain, and they feel so fragile, 9s.
Very much so. I've had lots of similar, like a 9 will not call the waiter and say, you know what, you got my order wrong and I'm a vegetarian and this is meat. They'll just sit there, they don't know how to allow themselves to have their own feelings. It's that my feelings are invalid. So the heart is shattered. I don't even know what my feelings are really. Okay. Then let's go to Enneagram 1, the grief-stricken heart. So the grief-stricken heart is the experience of the kind of disappointment of the world, the disappointment that then arises in the self as well. So you can imagine if you've got a very, very strict and harsh father figure, for example, and often the one has a father wound. This punitive, unreasonable, strict, and inconsistent discipline in your house, that then it's, okay, I'd better be perfect. My strategy is to be the good boy or the good girl because I never know when I'm going to experience this extreme judgment, being told I'm not good enough, etc. So there's a grief experience in that. And you can maybe think about a time that you were very harshly criticized, where somebody said something to you, someone who you loved said something to you that was profoundly critical of your character. And that experience of hurt, that experience of, oh, I'm not good in this person's eyes. They see me in a very, very negative way, and they see the worst of me. And that's the kind of experience of grief that a 1 will experience. It's similar to unfairness, but it's not perceived as unfairness, and it's not experienced in the same way as the dying heart. It's a different type of wound. It's like a lost goodness. The grief is for goodness, the goodness of the world, the goodness of the family, the parent, and of the self. So it's the loss, that profound sense of loss. Renata, can you say something here as well, maybe?
I think you've said it beautifully, Ing. Nothing to add there.
And Getty, I can't see you, but maybe from our journey together, you want to add something?
No, I think that's fine. It's just beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to definitely ask you on the 7th.
I'm just, sorry, what occurred to me, Ing, is that under stress, when the 1 moves into the 4, that's when they can feel that grief-stricken heart, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, because look at these lines as well. It's always helpful to look at the things on the lines, because you probably have experienced them now and then. Okay. So let's talk about the severed heart. We're now into the feeling center, 2, 3, and 4. So you can see that these wounds are more to do with one's experience of feeling loved or not. And so in the feeling center there, the 2, the severed heart, is a feeling of being cut off from love. So it's almost as if there's not enough love in this world for me to be loved. I'm not loved. I'm cut off from love. My heart is not loved. So that feeling of, can you imagine this beautiful love, the sword cuts it. And then there's this profound sense of loneliness and disconnection from the human family, from love itself. And that feeling of severedness then informs the 2 ego strategies. How am I going to get that love? How am I going to reconnect with love itself? I don't know how I'm going to do that. I'm going to have to earn it. I'm going to have to work very hard to find that love again, because it's gone. I don't have a connection to it. So that's the heart wound of 2, to be severed from love.
I'll add a little bit to that one. So out of this feeling of, and I know that you're still going to talk about how what then springs forth from that wounding, but the sense of being severed from love and from the source of love, which is almost like having a sense of then being disconnected to whatever you would call the source of love, God, or the universe, etc. And so if there is no love in the world, we can see where the pride comes from, because the 2 takes it on then, I'd better be the one to supply it. And that's the pride of the 2. I need to be the one to love everybody in the world and be the supplier of love in the world, because there is none. And you can really get a sense of the essence of the pride of the 2, in that they're taking on that I will then, because there is none, I will give it. And then when the 2 at their highest is realizing that there is nothing but love, which is also interesting, for the 4 to move to that high side of 2. That's where that 4 really, that's the cap of their healing, is realizing there is nothing but love.
Beautiful. And when the 2 moves down to the 4 holy idea of holy origin, is I come from love, I am love, love is all there is. Yeah, for sure.
Ingrid?
Yeah, well, thanks, Getty.
Something that Russ says about this is about, for many 2s, the dominant pattern is around either parenting their parents or parenting their other siblings as a response to this severing.
Yes. Is I better be the one to bring the love, because this love is missing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely. And in the object relations, they say the 2 wound is often with the father. And then what happens is with the masculine archetype. And then the 2 identifies very strongly with the feminine archetype of this nurturing and giving and softness. We could go into that for every single type, the object relations, etc. But I found that quite interesting, that there's this deficit. So I'm gonna identify with this nurturing energy, and I'm going to bring it, and I'm going to do all of it. And then the fixation is the false abundance, is that I actually can. Imagining that one can be the source of love for everybody. And it's obviously not going to work. It's all of these lead to a misguided attempt for a cure. I think that's very, very, very important. And that's that these heart wounds need to be healed. There needs to be some kind of palliative. There needs to be some kind of anesthetic because they're so painful. And our ego strategy is the misguided cure for the heart wound. That's what our whole strategy is all about, is how do I not feel this? It's too painful. These heart wounds are too painful. So we have to find ways of, like Nine's numbing it. Each one does their thing. Each one does their whole strategy as a way of coping with this heart wound. And that, I think, is what I should have started off with, is why do this? Because if we learn to be with this heart wound in a different way, then we aren't automatically going down that misguided cure. The counterfeit medicine for the heart wound is the ego strategy. So we fall into a lie of thinking that we can cure the heart wound with our ego strategy. So if you think about the dying heart of 8, it's this, oh, life is so tough. This is what goes on in this life, this level of injustice. I am this vulnerable in this world. So what am I going to do? I'm going to become tough. I'm going to become invulnerable. That is my cure for this heart wound. And so you can see the misguided idea of what the cure is. So in every single case, we need to understand the ego structure as a counterfeit or misguided cure for this suffering. And if we are able to be with this suffering and hold it within ourselves and make a home for it and meet it with self-compassion, with like a compassion for that child. Like Thich Nhat Hanh says, I am home for you, my suffering. So I've done this meditation as 7. I am home for you, my starving heart. When my starving heart wants to go grabbing and grasping and pursuing and trying to fill that suffering with stuff or experiences, then I say, I am home for you, my starving heart. And being able to hold that pain alleviates the need to go rushing off and do your thing. If you can be with your severed heart as a 2 and notice it and feel, oh my God, I'm feeling so severed from love. There's no love. If you can hold that experience, then you won't feel the compulsion to go and try and earn that love somewhere else. It'll open whole new areas of possibility if you're able to bring self-compassion to these wounds.
And I'll just add to the dying heart, the strategy of the 8. If you think about the lust, which is this need for intensity and excess, it's almost like if you feel like you're dying, you have to put a lot of effort into everything you do to try and keep going and to feel alive. And so you see this extra efforting, which is the lust of the 8, that everything feels like an uphill battle, and we approach everything with that kind of extra energy and efforting and intensity, which is what it would feel like if you were dying.
Exactly. And the compensation, is if my heart is drained of energy, I'm going to have to be very lustful to feel alive. I'm going to have to frickin' grab life like 8s do. They live big to compensate for this feeling of deadness. So in each case, again, yes. No.
Ingrid, could I say something there?
Yes, Lynn.
Yeah. So one of a metaphor that I sometimes I felt back in my 20s would have been, it's almost like you're carrying everything, and it's like dragging a heavy laden cart up a hill, and and it actually feels like a strain on the heart, and it's an exhaustion really when you get in touch with it. And I mean, I was at full capacity in my 20s, obviously, but what you actually long for is for someone to take care of you. That's when you get in touch with it, it's this deep, deep longing for someone to really take care of you, and someone that you can nestle into.
Oh, yes, absolutely spot on. Thank you. Yes. So the sexual 8 is the longing for surrender. And no, it is. It's that longing to release into softness and be cared for. That I've heard so many 8s speak about that. I just want someone to care for me when they get honest with themselves. Okay, let's go to the empty heart, which is 3. Renata, can I please ask you to start this one? And then if there's anything I want to add from my experience, I will.
So, Ing, I think it's it's just too painful to feel. So I think I'll illustrate 2 examples from my experience. Once in a workshop, going through a very traumatizing experience where a male delegate, verbally and almost physically attacked a younger female delegate, and went through this whole process afterwards of trying to just debrief and whatever. And at the end of it, like even talking about it now, I can feel my heart starts racing. At the end of it, I was traumatized, and so was everybody else. But we ended it. We asked him to leave the course, and then it was lunchtime, and we broke for lunch, which was a relief. And then we were going to regroup without him after that. And I got up from this traumatizing experience. It was harrowing. It had lasted like 2.5 hours, like processing and trying to work through. And I think there was some, really some pathology there. And I got up and I just walked to the front of the room, and because it was lunchtime, I do what I do. I took my phone and I started answering emails. Just this unwillingness to engage with what was true in my heart in the moment, and having to stop myself and say, for God's sake, put the phone down. But it's taken me years to come to that awareness. Can you just feel like crying? Can you just acknowledge that and go outside and find a place and cry? I broke my heart in my 30s over a relationship, and I did not shed a tear until 18 months later, just because I was doing long road trips every week for a client and listening to sad music. And I literally didn't mourn that breakup until 18 months later. And right now, it's so interesting watching this. And I kind of sense that there's this tension between my wings as a 3, between the 2 and the 4, between wanting to take on the responsibility of taking care of people, and how depressing that is. And so then it's just easier to close my heart. So the empty heart really has the doors closed where nothing can come in. So I'm in a situation right now where somebody in my life passed away from COVID. And even though I'm not responsible and I'm not the person, all his staff in South Africa and Mozambique are phoning me and going, what must we do? How will we get paid? Who's going to buy the business? And like, and at first I was going like, I don't know, I'll pay you out of my own money. And then I realized I can't possibly pay everybody's salaries. It's not even my responsibility to take care of them. But my immediate thing was like just breaking my heart for all of them and wanting to take care of them, and then having to go, this is too painful. I'm just not going to think about it, or I'm just not going to feel anything. And then how do I keep my heart open without feeling that I need to take on the responsibility? And so I prefer just to not feel.
Mm.
I prefer to take all those feelings, empty them out and close the doors, because then I can function. I couldn't function for the first 2 weeks when I had the feeling that there's cats and dogs and people who now are without, and I need to do something. And so, you know, the process to how do I keep my heart open and still function in my business, because I just couldn't function in my life while I was taking all of that on. And then I felt myself going like, just not your responsibility, close your heart and get on with it. And that's not the answer. How do I keep my heart open and still feel the love and compassion, but discern what I'm capable of doing or not? And yeah, I hope that helps.
And yeah, what that means in real life. And that's going to be a big thing to try and figure out. But one of the things you mentioned is that the type is a kind of integration between the wings. And that's, I think, a point that's interesting that Russ Hudson unpacks a lot in that book, The Enneagram of Belonging, which is a second book. And he speaks about every type being a kind of integration and balance point between the two wings. So keep that in the back of your mind and go and look at your wings and think about that. Maybe read Russ Hudson's book, but I like what you're saying. And that's particularly true of the 9, the 3, and the 6, is that there's the external focus, there's the internal focus, and then there's the conflicted one. So for 3 particularly, it's quite easy to understand. There's the totally external focused feeling, the deeply internal, and then there's this, okay, well, I'm just going to feel nothing. So I think if we go back to the early childhood Enneagram kind of textbook offering around 3, that it's a maternal wound in the object relations of not feeling that one can keep the good love. So it's an attachment type, and it does the 3 child will experience love, but then doesn't know how to keep that love. So remember, this is all happening unconsciously. The baby's not sitting there thinking, oh, how am I going to get my mom to carry on making eye contact? You know, it's deeply unconscious. It's wired in very early. But that's the dynamic behind the 3, is this feeling of, I loved something and then it was gone. So the strategy then becomes to, how am I going to get that? And one of the 3 things 3s do is, I'm going to just have an empty heart, not have feelings. And that's the wound, is my heart is empty. Like if you think about when you've lost love, think about someone you've really loved and then they're gone. That feeling, that's the feeling of, it's gone. And you're sitting with that sense of emptiness. It's like totally bleak. So that's the childhood wound, is there was all this love a minute ago and now it's gone. And there's just that empty feeling left. So then what am I going to do to get that love back? I'm going to do what is expected of me. I'm going to shine. I'm going to perform. I'm going to get approval in some way or another, whether it's by producing something or doing a little dance or whatever it is that the little kid does to try and get their mom to notice them. And because it's a maternal wound, the 3 kind of goes into quite a masculine, assertive way of being in the world. So for the assertive types, it's a maternal wound. So it'll be the 3, the 7, and the 8 are maternal. I want to really go into this. I'm going down a object relations track. But just be aware that there is a whole body of theory around this that is fascinating. Let me move on. Anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, just what occurred to me is like the whole strategy is I'm going to set everything up in a way that I won't feel, and I won't let anything get to me. It's that kind of thing. When I was in my first grade at school, one day the teacher shouted at me because I did something for the sake of efficiency that she deemed not okay. and I just find this so funny. As she was shouting at me, I whistled. I stood there as a 6-year-old and I went, and I was sending a message to her and to the class that I actually don't give a shit what you do. And it feels like my whole life is going, like, you can't touch me. I refuse to feel anything. Even if you're trying to hurt me, I'm not hurting.
Sure. And that's also like, I'm thinking your tri-type there is all reinforcing. You've got the 3, the 5, and the 8. So you're going to have a strategy for holding pain at bay and drawing on all of them. I think that's important to just note as well. Notice your tri-type is a combination of your 3 heart wounds. So if you're a, like Renata, 3, 5, 8, me, 7, 9, 4, I can tell you, I can really understand the heart wounds of the other types in my tri-type, because that's the context, that's the wounding that resulted in my overall strategy, which is a mixture of head, heart, and gut. So you will know very well the 3 heart wounds that kind of give rise to your tri-type reality strategy. It's not just one type. Okay.
Inge, I'll just quickly mention, just for people new to tri-types, that in the IQ9 Coaching Companion, in the circle at the top right-hand side, it's the 3 types that are in color.
Won't you share it again? Because you did that last time and it was so helpful and clarifying. I think people really benefit from seeing it. Oh, I've got to make you host. Hold on. Or co-host. Oh, you are, hey?
Yes, I'm sure I am. So here's one. So it's a 9, but 2's in color and 5's in color. So this is a 9, 2, 5. So it's the other colors are in gray. So your tri-type is actually highlighted in a color, and it corresponds to the 3 highest bar graphs. So out of 8, 9, and 1, the 9's highest. Out of 2, 3, and 4, 2 is highest. And out of 5, 6, and 7, 5's highest. So that's a quick way to know your tri-type from
This
the
is the tri-type of the problem solver.
Ah.
2, 5 now.
All their nicknames. Wonderful.
So just an interesting thing about the 3s, Russ Hudson writes that when he's doing depth work with a group and suddenly it starts really getting to deep places, the 3s start finding a touchy-feely and too woo-woo, and all the defenses against emptiness start presenting in the group space.
Definitely. But I think we've all got, our defenses are all equally intense. They've just got a different formula for coping with pain and discomfort and whatever. I know, like in that context, if you start going into wounding, 7's going to start making light of it or reframing it. Our defense mechanisms are totally unconscious and they kick in immediately. So not like we sit there planning either. How am I going to avoid pain? It just happens.
So Ingrid, an 873 then has a triple mother wound?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. So
Brenda has her hand up.
Yeah, well, Brenda, I see you.
Yes, yeah, I just want to comment on what you said there in a workshop, and when it comes to 3s, and Renata, I know you'll get me on this one. I'll speak from my 3 here. We just find it inefficient. So when you're running on empty, you realize I can't run on empty because I'm not going to get anything done. So forgo that feeling of empty, step up, do what you need to do, and go and find a tree to cry under later. But don't block the path efficiency and effectiveness in achieving what we need to achieve now.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to ask my niece forgiveness later for telling you the story, but I'm going to tell you the story. So this really gives you the heart of a 3. So my niece is a 3, and she's a physiotherapist, an ECMO cardiothoracic physiotherapist. So you can imagine how busy she's been in COVID. And I phoned her the one day and I said to her, "How are you?" And she said to me, "Auntie Brenda, there is no time for feelings and emotions. We have to get up and do what we need to do, and we will cry later." I phoned her mother and I said, "Best to be on standby." I saw her last night and I said, "How are you?" She said, "I am empty." That's a 3. And she worked very closely with that medical team that were killed in that helicopter accident. That took that gate that Renata was talking about, took it away completely. She cried so much that she couldn't go to work the next day. So when 3s go to feeling, which is why they put up that gate, and I'm not asking you to be extra soft on us because we don't want that, but when 3s open that gate, you must know there's emptiness. You must know how much flows in there and then how much flows out, because we're the contra. So when we do feel, my word, we feel and the whole world knows about it, but we very quickly realize this is ridiculous and it's inefficient and ineffective. So zip it up, close it up and move on. And we do it so efficiently and effective because that's what we do. But yeah, it doesn't mean that we don't feel. We do. We just don't have time for feelings. And that's where the emptiness in it comes. Bye-bye.
Russ Hudson writes of blankness, a blanking out.
Mm.
I think just to remember that we're talking about that emerging as very early, very unconsciously it emerges as the strategy. So we've got to think about early childhood wounding. So it's not a conscious choice that I don't have time for this, I'm just going to have a blank heart and get on with it. It's that I started off with a blank heart very early in my life. And that's actually the core behind that choice, to get on with it. That it's almost the other way around. It's not situation and then blank heart. It's the blank heart is what I bring into the situation. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay.
Ingrid, may I ask you a question? It's Karen speaking.
Yeah, I see you.
I have heard, I'm not sure if this is right or not, but I've heard that the wounding of the 3 is a rejection of self.
That I think is like an anti-self action that arises as part of feeling the emptiness of loss, that, okay, I can't afford to be myself. I can't be authentic because that's not going to get me what I need. So I better put on the right image in order to earn what I need. So what you're actually alluding to there is some of this, the anti-self actions, the lies and the trap. So those are part of our ego strategy that plays out.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
this also, the same as there are 9 of these, there are 9 of every one of these. There are 9 traps, there are 9 anti-self actions, there are 9 lies that keep us stuck in this continuous pattern of seeing the world in one way and being on this endless loop of behaviors that keep us stuck and limit our freedom and responsivity. So just say that thing you said again about the 3, that it's like a self.
It's a rejection of self.
Rejection. Exactly. So yeah, that is the anti-self action of 3. And it's very interesting to see how those manifest in each of the types. That's quite a fascinating little side branch one of the Enneagrams. That
Thank you.
So let's go on to 4. So the 4 is the stabbed heart. So if you think of a time where you felt completely insignificant, unheard, and invisible. So say you were in a social context and nobody wanted to play with you as a child, or you said something and no one even heard, or you were rejected. There's a feeling of a stabbed heart, of feeling defective, not good enough. There's something wrong with me, that people don't love me, and no one cares about me, and there's that. It's a literal kind of physical stabbing pain of unwantedness or insignificance. So behind all of the heart center is the experience of shame. And this is an emotion that we don't talk about a lot or deal with. A lot of us don't even understand it. I'm only starting to really understand it now because I've been following a psychologist called David Bedrick, who does a lot of work around shame, and starting to understand it's a kind of deep invalidation of one's being. So if you think about a time that you told somebody that something had hurt you, and they said, "Oh, for God's sake, grow up," and they completely invalidated your world, your feeling life, your reality, that's the kind of stabbing that happens, is my feelings really don't matter at all. And that's the kind of stabbing pain for the 4. And for the 4, it's not the mother or the father, it's the home, it's the household, it's the overall context that a 4 feels that in. So there won't be somebody in a 4's life that meets them, that connects with them, that makes them feel worthwhile and loved and visible and important. They feel that isn't available to them, it isn't anywhere. So that's quite important to know about the stabbed heart, is I'm not lovable. How come other people are being loved and have friends, or whatever form it takes? So that's the envy. It's not about wanting stuff that other people have got at all. The envy is about feeling ashamed of who I am. There's something wrong with me. I'm ashamed of having needs. I'm ashamed of everything about who I am, and other people have this stuff. So I'm comparing myself to them. Like, how come they're okay? What don't I have? Is there any 4 here who wants to tell me if there's something that I'm missing here around the stabbed heart? If you know it quite well.
I love the way you're describing it. What I would love to add is that, there's been a general ongoing realization of the extent of idealizing the other, and that it's not actually that way because of that interjection of not being good enough, not being real. It's also like a matter of like, when you've like lost your keys and then there they are in the drawer where you always put them. And, it's like there's something wrong and you suddenly realize, actually there isn't. There's a great relief. So it's like a balancing of both those things, which is quite interesting because that brings us into the equanimity. That it's a matter of not over idealizing and not over, seeing things so so wrong. Yeah, and come to the middle. Sorry, yeah.
Just want to test my understanding. So you said it's a balancing of two things, and what I think you were saying is that balancing the over-idealization of the other and the kind of self-denigration, and noticing that that's what you're doing is creating the vast split between myself as a total piece of shit, sorry, and the other person as this amazing, wow, they're so amazing. And,
Yes.
and is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Because it's a thing like you think that you've done something wrong and you actually haven't. And you think that the other person has done it all right and you realize that they actually haven't. And that you're actually all human together.
Yeah.
You know, in a normal way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful, because then you start experiencing that balance, equanimity within. So you're not thrown off by every person that you encounter, that something is triggered in you of your defectiveness. And then I see it as that line up to what you say, everybody's human together. That's like Holy Origin, is we're all beautiful in the eyes of God, or however you want to see it. And then that line up to the serenity and the perfection in the one is like
Absolutely. I love the way you're saying that. Yeah. Yeah. There's a real sense of togetherness and belonging, actually, which is very different to the sense of alienation, which the four can feel. You know, I loved also how you described the sense of the home being, you know, rather than it being the mother or the father, you know, but there can be, you know, it's not a sustained sense of it, but, you know, it's like flashes of it. But I remember when I was very little, you know, having a sense once in the garden of, you know, well, I wasn't sure really who was the alien, but there were people in the house with the lights on, my family, and I was out in the garden and it was dark. And it was like, well, you know, there was a sense of alienness. So that sense of separation, of really not belonging. And then there's the other sense of belonging, which is when you really do start realizing how we all, well, when, you know, started realizing how we really are all the same, you know, with more and more an incremental growth, really, of getting there, you know, and also breaking through a kind of a social anxiety as well at times.
Yeah. Because that feeling of being outside in the garden as an alien, I just like really feel I don't matter. No one even notices that I'm out here by myself. And I'm sure that the social anxiety around that is huge, because if one's walking around with that feeling, you know, you're going to be scared to say anything in a group in case you feel the shame of not being welcome, not being included, not even feeling like a human being.
Absolutely. That's very well captured, Ingrid. Very well captured, because, yeah, exactly. You're like frozen. You know, in fact, I saw a beautiful YouTube documentary on this condition of little girls who, in fact, couldn't speak. They would freeze, you know, in certain circumstances. And, you know, it's something that they started following and then working with. And it was quite amazing watching that, because it is something like that, you know, there's a fight and flight mode, freeze, that sort of comes up.
And it's very much a shame response to trauma.
Yeah, and then I mean, like, my partner was phenomenal, because, you know, he's a 2, and you know, just like seeing how easy in certain situations it was, like you said hello, and then people just said hello back, and then you were all connected, you know. it was quite amazing. I mean, this was like 30 years ago, but still, it's like, yeah.
You
You know.
remember, you remember that time he said hello? I love that. That's great.
Yeah, yeah.
That's helpful.
Ingrid, if I can offer, so one of the things that Russ says that's really interesting is just as much as twos want to rescue, fours want to be rescued.
Yes.
And that the four is cycling between this idea of idealization and disappointment, which the psychoanalytic word for would be denigration, that idealization leads to denigration. So the envy of the four is about not being enough and then not being enough. And then when the integration starts, the equanimity, the enough point is reached.
Mm. Mm.
Thanks.
Mm.
Ingrid, this is Chris.
Yes.
Is there, I'm a four, is there a sort of almost like a multiplier effect? So I'm a gay man, I work quite a lot with the LGBT community, and the sense of shame that I experienced as a gay child growing up, looking out into the world and not seeing my feelings, my emotions being represented in the same way that I was feeling them. It almost feels like as a four and as a gay four, there's this sort of multiplication, which means my sense of everything that the other people have described here is almost amplified. I don't know that that's a typical four response, of course. Nobody feels it like me, but I'm just wondering if there's sort of almost like a multiplier effect sometimes here.
Absolutely. I can totally say that based on my coaching experience and my experience of working with people who are in any way marginal or shamed socially. So, for example, if people are on the autism spectrum, then they experience ongoing shame through their life because they struggle to fit in. So they feel fourish, no matter what type they are. But surprise, surprise, if you go onto spectrum support groups, you will find a massively disproportionate number of fours. So, and so that's a type emergence issue. I'm not sure of the correlation, whatever. I don't understand it very well. It's just a pattern that I've noticed. But what you're saying, that amplifier effect massively, massively. So when I coach fours and they go into their shame and their introjection, it's a complete implosion into, am I just a terrible person? What am I going to do with myself? I'm such a useless piece of shit or whatever. So that it's that introjection of judgment, shaming, gaslighting, denial, that LGBTQI people are subjected to, autistic people. So obviously it comes in different forms. Socially, Black people are subjected to it. Like, your voice doesn't matter. You're invisible. You're treated in some way like a second-class citizen. Then you're going to know exactly what shame feels like.
You know what I want to do? I'm really moved to do this. You know the thing. There's also this specialness in being in that position. So there's also something about really feeling a sense of kind of uniqueness. So if one's stuck in the frozenness and the implosion of it, then it's very, very real, that. And then there's also the thing of really feeling, that specialness. Like I remember in the first, it was at one of Pam Rue's workshops, we were having, there was a group of us fours. And, and this is where Chris maybe, for a moment, with a both and, not an either or. But when you say, I don't know if I'm doing this because I'm being a four, there's something there about also like we become really special in being in a certain situation, like being able to kind of express the pain and do it with intensity and make it really special and get very subtle with it. I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's like, and then there's also the bravado of and it's also authentic of you know, savior and saving and working with the outsider, you know, or identifying with the outsider and saying, this is valid and your position really is real. And just bringing it to the fore, you know. I hope, oops, I meant FORE, you know, that there's something special there too. And in this group with Pam, it was like the rest of the types were saying to us, no, you're not so special. What makes you think you're so special? So there's a funny kind of play that happens, because sometimes the fours get kept in that position of victim unconsciously in a group, you know, because there's something, it's very odd. And then also they're too special, and then they get others to feel jealous, you know.
I hope. That's what we do though with our type, is we try and make other people feel what we're scared of. So 8s make people feel vulnerable, 7s make people feel deprived. So that's what we do. We, as a 4, you try and make other people envious of your specialness and difference. And as you were saying, taking refuge in this identity is like, okay, well, be homophobic, I'm going to be fucking fabulous. You know, that could be a strength. Or if you're going to judge me for being autistic, I'm going to be the most brilliant person you've ever met. You're not going to understand a word I'm saying because I'm a quantum physicist and stuff you know. So it's like taking on that identity and yeah, it's what you're saying.
Making it so unique, yes. And then other people feel, you know, WTF. I mean, what the fuck, really? Or they fall for it, you know, yeah.
I think anybody really falls for each other's ego style. We do train them to, and we try to get them to fall for it. Tom Condon speaks a lot about how we train others to leave our ego structure in place. Like 7s train people to think they're fun and blah blah. Every type is doing it, but people are profound enough and deep enough to know the truth in their heart. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But what you mentioned, something important, authenticity, ego trap of 4. And these ego traps are very subtle and very interesting. Like the 8 ego trap is justice. So we have this justification for our ego style. And that's what the trap is. It's actually very fascinating. So the trap for 7 is idealism. So maybe I'll do another session on the ego traps. They're really interesting. But that authenticity, when you feel yourself thinking, oh, I just need to be authentic, you know you're in the trap. So I'm glad you surfaced that. Russ, is there anything to add around this? Because we've been going around on the basis of your question.
No, I really like how you described shame as a deep, inauthentic. What was the word you used? A deep invalidation. I haven't heard it described like that, but it takes shame and sort of takes it down to another level, which is how I've experienced it. So thank you.
It's the ultimate form of gaslighting, is that your feelings aren't real and they don't matter. And you know, when you've been shamed and told that your feelings don't matter, it does feel like a stab to the heart. You know, like if a woman's raped and some man on Facebook says, oh, get over it, you know, that's like taking a dagger to someone's heart. Okay, cool. Let's go on to 5.
Then can we take a quick break?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Yeah, so back at 10:02.
Thank you, Self-Praise.
Self-Praise has to remind that we have bodily needs. 10 minutes back at 50 past the hour, at 10 to the next hour, wherever you are in the world.
Yeah. See you just now. Cha-cha. Everyone switch on their video for a second so I know you're back. I'm going to start again.
In fact, could I ask, I'd love to take some photographs for our soon to be launched Facebook page of our group, which will make it easier for us to let you know when the sessions are going to be. We'll keep the emails because not everybody's on Facebook. But if you could put webcams on and just smile for 1 second so I can take like some photos of like lots of little smiley faces for our Facebook page so people can see that we're all lovely, friendly people and they can join if they wish to. Let me just pause the.
Okay, great. So let's go on to 5. I'm going to check for time. I want us, the lost childhood messages are quite clear after this because they match so closely. So we first spend the majority of the time here. Okay, the desiccated heart. I thought it was like desiccated coconut, and I always thought that meant shredded until I went and looked it up, and it means dry. So the 5 heart is the dried out heart. And again, the 5 is not the maternal or the paternal, it's the household context. And for 5s, the 5 child early on feels that their needs don't really matter. So the parents' needs are coming first, they are not being put first as a baby. So that feeling of my needs don't matter. It's not just that my needs aren't going to be fulfilled, because that's the 7 heart wound, is my needs aren't going to be met. The 5 is that my needs don't matter. And as a result of that, 5s need to not have needs. So they disconnect from their own needs, they disconnect from their hearts, and their hearts become a kind of a wasteland in a sense, like a desert. So it's the idea of the desert heart is another one for 5. I think Russ also used that term, hey? Yeah. So think of it as the desert heart. It's actually probably a better word. That you're in the desert, there's no water, water being the symbol of feeling, that it's just better to be dry. It's safer to have no needs because they're not going to be met anyway.
Another interpretation of the word desiccated, if you look it up in the dictionary, is lacking vitality or interest.
Nice.
And you almost see from the 8 and the 1 being the most viscerally alive, how when we move to the bottom in the space of 4 and 5, you see almost this loss of visible energy, vitality energy.
That makes sense. It's interesting, that line to 8, because the dying heart is the draining of color, and the desiccated heart is the draining of life force. And that's also why 5s give up easily, and they give up relationships easily as well. Like, they don't work to keep their connection. And that's part of that loss of vitality and connection. Loss of feeling. Like, they almost accept when feelings get lost. Like, I know some older 5s, and no one in their family talks to them because they've isolated themselves so badly and been so disconnected. But then they don't do anything about it. Like, they don't say to their grandchild, let's spend some time together. They kind of don't know how to do that often. Their children are all far away, and some of them haven't spoken to their kids for a year. And it's that, it's just the kind of acceptance of the dryness, that my needs don't matter. I don't even have emotional needs. They become very unconscious of their emotional need for connection and love, even though they're such unbelievably beautiful, sensitive human beings. If you think of them connecting to the high end of 8, that innocence is just so lovely. But they, that's the path of release and integration, is towards that. I just need to close this door. Hold on a sec. Okay. Any questions or comments on the desiccated heart, on this dry desert heart, and how it's a response to a household in which needs don't matter?
Just also in the dictionary description, in terms of dried out, having had all the moisture removed from it, and it's like almost all the juice like taken out, and all that's left is this crust of a dried out shell, I guess.
Yeah. That's a very helpful thing, because that feeling, that illusion we have that 5s are cold and aloof and dry, they train us to see them that way, because then we don't try and get close to them. The moisture, the emotion has been removed. They've removed it from themselves. Anyone want to comment on 5?
I got a question, Ingrid.
Yeah.
I was working with a 5, and it's that you have already touched on it, in that you're saying, when you're about with 5s and authenticity, that it can be the trap. And I found with him, and I wonder if you could speak about it, it's a stuff of when he's not attached and he's not feeling. I mean, it was a point where, we were working with it, and it felt ever so slippery. I mean, I left it with him, and then said, also said to myself, I think that's a good idea, because he's a 5, he'll work it out and think about it. But I was wondering if you could talk about that a bit, because it's like how he's non-attached, and yet it could be that desiccation, and yet it can also be more in line with the virtue. How would you talk about that distinction?
Between isolation and non-attachment?
Yeah. So that where it's dysfunctional and functional, that it's not indulging in cutting off from his feelings, but remaining non-attached, so that something, isn't setting him into a spin. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
You've got the virtues in front of you.
Oh, great.
So look at the virtue of 5 there. Non-attachment is allowing oneself to be in the natural flow of life, experiencing the wonder of it. So that's very, very intimate with life and experience. Non-attachment is not a kind of disconnection or detachment. Buddhist attachment, in the true sense, it's not this dry intellectual thing that some of us mistake Buddhism for in the West. In Buddhist philosophy, there's the heart mind, and non-attachment is a very loving state. So we've got to get out of this idea of non-attachment as disconnection or seeing things from a far distance. It's actually, if we're non-attached, we're able to be very intimate with life.
Love it. Lovely. Thank you. Beautiful. Exactly.
And if you think about the line from 5 to 8, we sometimes get it wrong. We think that when people go down the line, they go to the outer behavior of the other type, which is not true at all. What they do is they go down the line to the virtue and the holy idea. The virtue of 8 is innocence. So when 5s go down the line to 8, they experience the world with this fresh wonder of non-dual awareness. They don't see a barrier between themselves and the world. And that's what happens to 8 in the virtue. Because they're not resisting life and they're undefended, they go into a very innocent experience of the world where they're not bringing any of their historical experience into a prejudice of the moment. So they don't resist. They don't see it as us and them. They don't see it as me against the harsh world. So that's the quality of innocence, is a dissolution of separation. And when 5s go into non-attachment, they're able to actually encounter the world in a beautiful, fresh, flowing way. And they're at ease with the continual evolution of the universe in front of them, and they're participating in it. They're not trying to make sense of it in a little box, like go away and have this whole system for understanding the world while the world's flowing by in its beautiful continuous creation. They're actually able to participate in that and be with it and not be afraid of it. They don't feel overwhelmed by it because of this virtue of non-attachment. Does this help?
Absolutely. No, very, very much so. You know, it's that thing. And then what I'm also realizing is, you know, that factor of growth and those levels, you know, like while you were talking as well, and I was reflecting on it, you're making so much sense. Really, thank you. It's that thing, though, as well, when one's moving along the path of growth, that one can oscillate a little, you know, in kind of working it out and slipping back into being, you know, cut off or actually opening up. And, you know, it's like a birthing or something. I don't know. But I hope that's making sense. But it was just lovely. It's making a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mary,
And I,
up.
Yeah, can I just add one thing? Because I'm a 5. You know, the thing is, as you said, it's about not actually fitting into your family, because if your parents' needs are so much greater than your own, they don't teach you. And I think we need to learn these things from our parents. Our parents don't teach us how to have needs or how to communicate with other people on the basis of getting our needs met. So you just go through life not even expecting to have your needs met. I know as a parent, I've always put my children's needs first. And to this day, I still don't ever feel like they get that mom has needs too. And I trained them that way. It's my fault. So that's the one thing. And the other thing is, what you do learn from a young child, from childhood, is how to relate to life, to God, to the universe, to all the wonderment of life outside of relationship, because that's not where you're getting your needs met. Your needs get met through your connection with God, the universe. I don't want to be religious about it, but for me, it was God. And you get your needs met in a different way. And so then it's easy to become not disconnected. What is the word that you were using before? The virtue of what's the virtue? Not being attached, because you're not, the attachment to things comes from getting your needs met. If you don't even expect to have your needs met, it's easy to not necessarily even feel the need to be attached, and to find your joy in the large flow of life. So the two things I wanted to say, though, just to restate it, is the fact that your parents don't teach you that your needs matter, or even how to go out and get those needs met. Because our first relationships are always with our parents. And if they're so busy getting their own needs met, I mean, I had great parents, but they were very much about themselves. They never, I just always felt I didn't belong. I didn't fit in. I was different. I didn't fit in.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that's helpful. That our needs just don't have a place. They're so busy with themselves. And then we aren't trained to articulate our needs and to have any, because we don't even know that that's possible. So very, very early on, a 5 baby will not have their needs validated or explored. The parents won't say, how are you feeling? Do you like this food? There's a disconnection there from connecting with the child's needs or validating their needs.
So you go into a different world.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to say, I think with 5s, like for you, it's been spirituality and this, the universe that you connect with that gives you joy and fulfillment. So for other 5s, it would be a system of ideas, like they might become a Jungian or an Enneagram person.
Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah. So it's like, this is where I can go. And that actually there's an infinite supply of that stuff. You're definitely not going to run out of, philosophy and all that beauty. It's so I think that's just an alternative. It's not just spirituality. Most 5s are now atheists.
We have a question about avarice. We have a beautiful description by Amanda in the chat about desiccated heart. And I just wanted to add, in terms of the 5's parents not taking the needs into account, with my clients, what I hear a lot is that their need to spend time alone is not allowed in a family system. So I've got a 5 who said, on holiday, they would go to the coast and all she wanted to do was sit in the hotel room and read books. And her parents insisted that she come to the beach and sit there with all the cousins and sisters and participate in being around people, which was her worst nightmare. So this needing for privacy and solitude is not a need that's sometimes not met. Yeah.
I think that is so helpful, and I'm so glad you added that, because the idea of your needs not being met, I'm framing as if it's a withdrawal of care. But with 5s, more often than not, it's actually feeling emotionally overwhelmed. So I think that's very, very, very important, what you just said. It's more likely to be emotional overwhelm. So it might be parents fight a lot and they're so involved in their own drama that the 5 feels overwhelmed. They can't get silence. Or what you're saying, being dragged along all the time. I've got a 5 son, and I know that's what I did when he was little, being an unhealthy 7. I had him when I was 22 years old, and I was in the 7 mania, and it was like go, 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 adventure, fun, party. He didn't ever get a chance to relax and withdraw. You know, it was like, okay, you can sleep in the car on the way between that party and that party, the poor child. And then also dragging him to every spiritual experience and church and mosque, and poor God, these poor children of mine. So yeah, if you have a 7 parent, you can imagine how your needs aren't considered at all as a child.
So
Because
that links to the question about the avarice, which is the 5's need for conserving their inner resources, and that need not being met. And then the other thing that also occurs is that because of what we project, we then don't get our needs met, because the 5's are so independent and so self-accessing and so closed off. I have a 5 client who the 2 older sisters were given everything they wanted, but when she wanted something, the parents would say, well, you need to work for it. And you need to create that for yourself, which ultimately has made her the most resourceful, incredible, successful businesswoman. But, you know, as an 11-year-old, she started her first business because she wanted a motorbike. They lived on a farm. And the parents said, well, you know, you better do something to earn it. And so, you know, where they lived was in a remote place. So she'd go and shoot buck and pay somebody to take them to the butcher. And she bought her own motorbike.
it's wild, hey, that thing, we train people. It's the same story again. And what happens
Mary's
Yeah, I just have one other thing, and that is the huge need to understand, which is what we always associate with a 5. But I remember just feeling that as an enormous need to understand. And when I went to connect with other people, it was wanting to be understood. So because I didn't know how to create intimacy, I thought it was about explaining things about myself so that I could be understood and that I could understand other people, which I guess is what made me into a therapist. The desire to understand other people, thinking that that's the way to connect. Just wanted to say that because that whole thing of understanding is huge for a 5.
Yeah. And that's why it is easy to connect with 5s if you ask them about their special interest and you get on their wavelength about stuff that they love, their intellectual interest. That's why it's very easy to brief an Enneagram 5 on the Enneagram by starting off explaining this is the history of the system, it's Neoplatonic philosophy, what do they love that stuff. So if you can connect with them there first and build rapport, then you can start connecting more deeply emotionally.
Ingrid,
Yeah.
I'm working with a really fabulous, fascinating 5 at the moment, and he was telling me that as a small child, when he got home from school, he would go into the garden and tell himself the story of the morning at school. And it was a kind of a processing and decompressing. And I asked, how was that experience? He said, it was just the most wonderful time. I was on my own and I was processing what had happened. And then I'd go back into the house and I'd be able to interact with my family. It's really quite a lovely thing.
It's really interesting. I haven't been following the chat, but I see the avarice. I think, Renata, you explained that well, that need to withhold is because I'm not getting the chance. My energy is scarce and I feel overwhelmed. And what 5s doubt is their capacity to live life and to handle life. So they don't feel they have what it takes to handle this overwhelming reality. So they've got to withdraw and conserve their energy to be able to manage. So you can imagine that thing of dragging my son to one thing after the other and kind of squeezing in rest and eating on the go like 7s do. That child feels like, I actually don't know how to do this. I haven't got the personal resources to manage this level of chaos. And so it's that need to withhold. Renata, that's what you were describing, a bit of that.
Yeah, and I think just to link the avarice then is, you know, it's from fear of being depleted. And if we look at the desiccated heart as being, there's no moisture or juice left inside me. So don't come and make more demands because I've got nothing to give. I need to hold on because I'm dehydrated in a desert. So don't come and ask me for my water, my life force, when there's no oasis in sight, you know, and I'm dried out. So yeah, it's the fear of being depleted. So I don't give off my inner resources, which is time, knowledge, and energy usually.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
Ingrid,
great.
Ingrid?
Hi, Kevin.
Hello, it's so good to see you. I have a question. I came in late because of the time difference here in the States. I'll get it right maybe next time. When you were describing the mother and the father, is the 9 and 4 and 5, is that the home?
Yeah.
So 5 and 4, you're talking about a home wound, which fits right along with what I'm hearing about the 5-4 experience.
If you look at the Hornevian triads, the 9, 4, and 5 is the withdrawn. That's the strategy for a difficult home experience. Then the compliant types is the father wound. It's the 1, the 2, and the 6. And then the assertive types are the mother wound. So that's a whole story in itself, but it's very helpful reference point.
I love it. I haven't heard this before, but I love that framework. Thank you.
Pleasure. Kevin's my Facebook friend, and I'm meeting you for the first time. It's so wonderful. Cool. Okay, where are we? Anything more about 5? Anything you want to add on 5, Kevin? Because you said there your SX 5.
Renata did. I was thinking the whole time the dehydration part, that it feels a lot like a raisin, and the connection, Mary, that you talked about with trying to open the heart and share and connect with people and be understood and help other people understand me, feels like a lot of work. So if you think about even what's happening at like a cellular level with a grape as it turns into a raisin, it's releasing all of the moisture, and it feels like it's losing all of that juice. You know, when I'm having to be put in a situation I'm not willing really to be or comfortable to be in, I find that it feels a lot like being dehydrated. So I think that was a good word for it.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. And have you got insight for us on the Essex as the counter type of 5 around this? Because I think it manifests very differently in the counter types.
Ingrid? Stephen.
Sorry, I just asked that question to Kevin, so I just want to let him answer before we take someone else's input.
You're talking, would you ask the question again, Ingrid?
The counter types manifest these things differently. So say the 6 heart wound, which we'll get onto just now, is the terror-stricken heart. And for the counter type, it manifests as this boldness that looks quite 8-ish, going against. So how does the desiccated desert heart of 5 happen in the SX counter type of 5?
By counter type, I'm coming from a Russ Hudson model more than narrative. Is counter type the instinct, sexual instinct, or is it? Okay, yeah. I would probably describe my experience a little bit as connecting to the 8 and being more maybe authoritative or maybe authoritarian about my needs, and I would come out of nowhere. So I've described it in the past a little bit like a lightning strike, that there's this charge that's building up and there's this deficit that's on the other end of it, and before you even know what happened, a 5 came out of nowhere and just struck with a lot of power. That was, I think that's how I would describe the counter type difference. You probably wouldn't get that out of a self-pres 5.
No, I don't think so. Thank you. That's interesting. I'm going to go away and think about that, because it's an angle that I haven't ever thought of in relation to 5s. Thank you.
It The counter type of the 5 is the romantic and artistic 5. And it's almost like if the 5s are keeping everybody at bay, the SX5 has got enough juice just for that special one other that they're either looking for or they've found. that ultimate love, that one special ultimate love person that they're either looking for or they found, and then that's the object, and there's enough for that person only, for the one special one. Or for an artistic pursuit, they're a third most likely, I believe, to become artists, so they can be quite creative, SX5s. I know that Gail Tolman has a question, and then Stephen has a question. Ing?
And
Thank you.
was it you, Gail? I thought I heard Craig. It was Gail.
Yes, thank you. So I did an Enneagram for a very good friend who's a 5 who lives in the UK. And we've been really, really supporting each other through lockdown. And what's so interesting when I hear about the home wounds is that we have a lot of similarities. And she said of a lot of friends, I kind of get her. And there's a lot of similar overlap, which is interesting. There's a lot that's not, but like that withdrawing of resources and feeling disconnected, and then at times, and creative, and there's just an interesting understanding.
Yeah. I think that's a nice thing to point out, because it shows the dynamism of the Enneagram and how we can understand any type, because they're somewhere down our lines or in our tri-type or on the line from one of our tri-type elements. So there are always pathways to understanding, or if they share a wing with us or something. So, and also, you know, if you're a 6, then you're in the head center. So you feel you're dealing with a similar kind of wound, which is a lack of safety. So there are going to be subtly different responses to a feeling of the world being a dangerous place. So you're automatically going to be dealing with the same underlying issue, the same way as all the feeling types are dealing with an underlying feeling of shame or lovelessness or disconnection. It's just subtly different flavors. So yeah, I think that's cool. You know, there's the ability to connect and be compassionate.
Thank you.
Stephen?
I have a question about the self-praise 5. Do you think that being self-praised sort of intensifies the disconnection, intensifies the desiccation, dryness?
I think that's why the self-praise 5 is the kind of quintessential 5. When people think of 5s, they think of the self-praise because they're most obviously disconnected, because they're so walled in. Whereas the fusiony type of 5, the sexual 5 who's looking for that confidant, and the social 5 who's the totem, it's a different manifestation.
And self-praise is so concerned with conserving resources anyway. I think it would apply. Are you self-praise 5s?
Well, I'm actually self-praise 6, but in terms of the integrative measures, my 5 is like a 1-point difference, and I find myself living quite tangibly in 5, with obviously 6 as well. So it's almost like I've got my 1 foot in each, and there is a lot of. I mean, this is what we've been speaking about 5s now is resonating hugely, because there's a lot of disconnection from and self-protection from shame. So it's the disconnect from the heart and disconnecting from other people, because it's a self-protective mechanism, and not reaching out and staying isolated and conserving resources. And reaching out is quite a difficult thing, I think, for a self-praise 5. It's a conscious thing, certainly perhaps if it's at a less healthy level. So those are the kinds of things that were going through my mind, yeah.
We've also got to remember in the object relations, 5 is a rejection type. So 5, 2, and 8 are rejection types, and they're coping with the anticipation of rejection or the fact that a love object hurt them and did reject them with a strategy. So 8's anti-rejection strategy is to armor up. 2's anti-rejection strategy is to give, give, give. And you feel those kind of tendrils from a 2 often because they're so scared of being rejected that that's their strategy, is to move towards. And the 5 anti-rejection strategy is almost to not care whether you reject them or not, or to act as if they don't. So there's that training thing coming in again from the object relations.
And I think also it's kind of the underlying narrative for a 5, well, certainly a self-press 5 is like, I don't need you, and I also don't want you to need me.
Exactly. So that's strategy for rejection, is like really not caring.
And so you become totally self-sufficient, independent, which obviously has unhealthy consequences. But yeah.
Well, that's the fake cure. The fake cure for the dying heart. I mean, not the dying heart, the dried out desert heart. Just checking time. I still want us to get to the lost childhood messages. There will be an obvious outflow, as I said, but I want us to get through the 6 and the 7 so we can quickly get to that. And I'm not doing any breakout groups because we're having quite a lot of shared discussion. So let's go to 6. I want to share my screen again so that we've got these images. Oh yeah. Got to find that thing. Okay, here. Okay, the terror-stricken heart. So again, this is in the father wound in the object relations triad, and it ends up being one of the compliance types in the Hunivians. So we've got here a lack of safety in the 6 growing up environment, and usually it's a fear of the archetypal father figure. So there's a damaged relationship with authority in the 6, which is why you find 6s have such an ambivalence around authority. So there's that loyal skeptic thing going on. So the 6 is seeing, where is this authority figure, dangerous or not to be trusted, at the same time as trying to win safety or trying to gain safety by being compliant with that authority figure. So again, it's like a strategy for how am I going to stay out of trouble with a dangerous person, really. So the 1's way of staying out of trouble with a dangerous father experience is to try and be good all the time and be perfect. The 6's experience is to be as compliant as possible, but at the same time, you need to be fearful and you need to be vigilant because you don't know when that danger's coming. So this is the 6 strategy is, how am I going to live with this level of fear and insecurity and anxiety? And it's anticipating the worst. So those are some of the 6 dynamics. You've got to be anticipating and doing scenario analysis because that danger is going to come at you left field and you don't know when. And it's very dangerous. It can be like a life-threatening experience for a 6 child. Even if it's not literally life-threatening, for a 6 child, it feels life-threatening. So it feels like I'm going to be abandoned. I'm not supported. This father archetype, the system of rules in this household is not trustworthy. I'm not safe in the setup of this household, which is a masculine archetype. Like the rules, I can't rely on the rules. I can't rely on the principles that are at play in this context. So those are all masculine archetypes, father archetypes. It's not literally that you have an abusive father. That might very well be the case. But it's that dynamic of authority. An authority figure is both something that I need to comply with, but it's also quite dangerous. Anyone want to comment on that? Renata, is there something that you can add there around the 6 terror?
No, Inga, just this, I think you've covered, you know, this thing about as children, the way we stay safe in our terror is by following the rules in the house. And usually it's the masculine, you know, it's the father figure that is the keeper of what are the rules. And then in adulthood, the rules take the place of the father figure. So as long as I paint inside the lines, and that's why they're often attracted to accounting and auditing and domains where the rules and the lines are very clear. It's black or white, you know, auditing and company secretarial, and they do really well in those things because they feel very safe within the boundaries of the rules. And you can imagine as a small child that as long as I know where I get into trouble or where I don't, then I don't need to be scared.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. That's great. And looking for a trustworthy system of rules can translate into looking for a political ideology that I can belong to, like it might be a white supremacist group or something, like National Socialism. Nazism is characterized as very six-ish. So it's a very rigid system of rules that people identified with very strongly. Then you can also think of it in religious terms. So I'm looking for an affiliation with a very sound, solid, trustworthy system that makes sense of reality as a whole. So remember, 6s are in the head center, which is all about reading the world, making sense of it, and finding security, because the underlying feeling of all the head center types is anxiety. So the 6's way of finding security is to try and get external sources of security. So that'll be these sources of safety. So sometimes it'll be an authority figure. In the social 6, it's more likely to be a system of rules, so that the social 6 is a duty-oriented type. So I've got a very, very strong 6 wing, and I'm very attracted to philosophical systems that I find legitimate. So when these new age self-proclaimed gurus come along, I'm like, what's the lineage? Who is their teacher? This immense skepticism with which things that don't seem to have depth and legitimacy. So, you know, I want to know this person is related through this lineage to that prophet 3,000 years ago, because otherwise I feel insecure. Like, what am I dealing with here? This is some new age shit. So 6s are like that. They look for security in multiple places, and they want to have a stable sense of reality. So anything you want to add there, Renata?
No, I think let's move to the 7, unless there we've got any 6s or got something to add.
Any 6s want to contribute around this? Insights, nuances, examples? Gail, thanks.
Okay, so I'm in 6 thinking, and what you said reminded me of many years ago, and I'll be quick because we've got to get through. I was recommended by my chiropractor to go to his amazing spiritual teacher and to do a course. So I went along to the course. So I thought, okay, and I'll give it a try. And I went along one evening, and the way that they ran it, I felt so uncomfortable and unsafe. It just felt like group control. It felt not authentic. It felt like he was testing the group for how he could get them under thumb. And I left. I walked out. They said, no, you can't just go. I said, well, actually, I can. And I left. And I think that's what you're talking about.
Absolutely. This radar for danger. And for that, it's not safe. It's not a safe system. I can't trust this thing. It doesn't hang together. There are problems with it, which is why a 6 in a meeting later on will say, wait a minute, you're ignoring something big here. So all of this comes from this early terror-stricken heart that is related to authority, rules, systems, all the things that the masculine archetype represents. Getty, is that your hand up?
Yeah, something that's interesting in the work that I do with teams is helping the team understand that the 6 doing just that, raising problems that people haven't thought about, is not negative. Because they say, oh my gosh, there goes Getty again. But actually, this person is looking after the team by generating the what-if scenarios. And it shifts the dynamic enormously from Getty being perceived as like perennially negative to being our guardian.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful change in the dynamic of a team.
Absolutely. I've also experienced that a lot with teams because people get really irritated with 6s. Like in a strategy session, everyone's being a visionary and the 6 is like, we tried that, and it can sometimes feel like a wet blanket. So if the 6 becomes aware of not to do that every time someone says anything, and the team becomes aware of how valuable that 6 input is, you can create enabling constraints. Like what I sometimes do is I say, okay, we're going to have a whole session in the afternoon around risks, pitfalls, things we need to mitigate, but we're going to constrain that so that we deeply value that energy, but we don't let it detract from the other energy, like the 7 or the 8 or the 3, that is all about big, let's do it, we can. Thanks for that point. Cool. Okay, should we move on to 7?
Yep.
7 is the starving heart, and the underlying experience there is my needs aren't going to be met. So I gave that example earlier of, the child is standing in the cot shouting, hungry, wet nappy, whatever, and the mother takes a little bit too long to get there. That can be the full extent of the trauma, everyday trauma. It's like not big time trauma necessarily, but the 7 interprets it as the 7 baby is like, my needs aren't going to be met. I'm actually going to starve to death. I'm going to die. And infants experience things as life or death because it literally is. And they've got a very low tolerance for deprivation or neglect at that age. And they need to, they need to scream loudly to get their needs met quickly. So what happens in the 7 case is the sense of deprivation. I'm going to starve to death. And so that forms the foundation for the 7. And then in the object relations, the 7 is frustration. So while the 8 and the 5 and the 2 are rejection, the 9, the 6 and the 3 are attachment, the 7, the 1 and the 4 are frustration. Is that it's never going to be enough in one way or another. So for the 7, that is very strongly that sense of, I'm starving, I'm not being met, and what am I going to do about that? So that then translates into that 7 grasping attachment, eternally trying to fill the sense of the fear of deprivation. And it's a very restless, anxious, there's a deep anxiety in 7. And there's this unconsciousness of that it's a desperate, fearful need. The grasping because I think I'm going to die of deprivation. And 7s have the rationalization and the defense mechanism and the self-symbolism that they imagine that it's enthusiasm. So it's a big breakthrough for 7 to realize that it's starvation and anxiety and not enthusiasm. And that there's a kind of breakthrough for every type that happens when you realize what's really going on, what's really fueling it. And the heart wound is a brilliant way of bringing about that shift. Like, oh, I'm actually trying to feed an eternal void. And the starving heart you can compare to the Buddhist idea of the hungry ghost. The hungry ghost in the Buddhist paintings of this, in the imagery, is this kind of gnarled troll type of looking figure with a massive belly, but it will never be satiated. Never, never, never. So the 7's misguided cure for the starving heart is to grasp externally forever and ever, and never to be able to be settled in the present moment, and not realizing that in the now there's a sense of fullness, and that starvation goes away if you can relax into presence. But that's very, very, very difficult for sevens to do, because this, with all of them, that sense of that heart wound is running the show from pre-verbally. It's not a conceptual thing. Does that make sense? Anyone want to add anything from their experience of sevens, or being a seven, or anything?
Just in the
Renata?
And then whoever it was that was speaking, we want to hear from you next. So just what occurs to me is in the fixation of the seven, which is in the mental space. It's the dualistic space of our thinking, which is anticipation or planning. So it's, if you were starving, not only would you want food right now, but it would be really comforting if you feared starving. So you would make sure that you had supplies for tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So sevens fill their future. Not only do they fill right now with distraction, but they fill the future with planning and events and things to look forward to. Just living with my self-preservation 7 daughter during lockdown, how she kept ordering even something small so that there was always a delivery to look forward to. It was almost like that courier arrived here every day, even if it was with just a small thing. So this gluttony to, and if there was nothing to look forward to and no delivery was on its way, and the excitement, the fact that, oh, she got the SMS, this thing's going to be delivered today. So this constant need to have the future filled up, so that way we can't starve if we've got our cupboards full of supplies, metaphorically.
Yeah, and things coming, that anticipation. And also what's interesting, what happens with 7 is eco-fraudulence is part of that fixation. So it's not just planning life and stuff, it's imagining alternative versions of myself. And that's the trap there, is self-symbolization. So it actually happens at an internal level, is I might starve of life itself. And that's why the holy ideas are holy wisdom, holy plan, and holy work, is I don't trust the universe. I don't trust life. So I've got to grasp as much as possible, and I've got to be as many possible things, so that fear of missing out it comes from the starvation.
Who was it that spoke up just now when Ingrid invited somebody to say something about the sevens? Please go ahead.
It was me. I was curious to look at this idea of starvation, anxiety, not enthusiasm. I wondered if you could say a little more about that, Ingrid. The breakthrough point, I think you said it was, to recognize that it's starvation rather than enthusiasm. I'm not seeing that very clearly.
Well, I think like sevens are so fueled by that hype, and they live on it. They live on that hype. There's like that adrenaline and slight mania of sevens. And when they realize what's behind that, and they realize that it's not actually gleeful happiness, it's actually anxiety driven. That's a key for them to start thinking, okay, so where does my anxiety truly feel alleviated? It doesn't feel alleviated when I go partying every night. It actually feels better when I spend some time alone in the park doing Tai Chi. And then the anxiety is genuinely alleviated. So it's exactly like a drug for every type. There's a temporary alleviation of the suffering in the eco strategy. Like for 2s, they're feeling the severed heart, they're feeling the love deficit. So they go and visit their friends who they hardly know in hospital and take them a lovely gift and everything's lovely. And for a moment, they feel that the drug of love that comes from their ego strategy. But it's temporary. It's not sustainable. It's not real. It's not coming from within. For threes, they get the award. They're on the stage. They're the top. They're brilliant. And then what? It's just a temporary fix. It's like an injection of what you're looking for. And it is an addiction for that exact reason, is because it's the same way as drugs offer you a false promise of peace of mind or ease of being. It's a temporary fix, but then you go back again to the suffering. And if you read Gabor Mate, addiction is the cure for the heart wound. It's not the problem in itself. So if you think about that, sevens are getting that hit. They're getting the rush. But it's always temporary. They're going to wake up in the morning with that restless anxiety. What am I going to do today? What am I going to buy today? What delivery is arriving today? And when they don't have any of that, then they go back into a sense of deficit and restlessness. And if they allow themselves to notice, a kind of deep existential hole. So what sevens have to do to heal is go through that existential hole and face it. Face that it's an existential starvation and that it can't be filled except by being in it.
I can imagine that must be terrifying for them.
Seven, sorry?
I can imagine that must be terrifying for them.
That's hideous.
I mean, I'm terrified just thinking about it.
Of course.
Then how do you do it, Ingrid? I mean, I'm sitting with a sister who's a 7, and we're in an issue at the moment too. You know, when I say, well, I hope that you'll, read, and I genuinely say, I said this at one point that, I really hope that you heal. And she looked at me like I was completely balmy. There's nothing wrong. So I mean, this edge, I have to come in with this flow that the conversation took. What do you do at that edge if someone's that terrified?
I think it's the same with every type, that facing that heart wound and realizing it and integrating it is the same. It's very difficult for every type, but it starts with the recognition of, okay, I'm actually starving. And how do I be with it? I go back to that Thich Nhat Hanh thing. For me, that was one of the biggest breakthroughs, is what you're trying to do is create a stable inner home within that version of Buddhism. That what we're trying to do is to make a safe and stable and loving inner home for ourselves. And that's one of the most important things to do when you're healing trauma, is to be able to be in yourself and in your body and feel safe. So that practice for me of I'm home for you, my starving heart, is a massive breakthrough, because then I don't have to clutch and grasp and panic. I can just notice myself panicking and say, I'm home for you, my panic. It helps a lot. But obviously, I mean, all of these are a lifelong journey. You can imagine.
Ing, I'm thinking we need to get to the lost childhood messages with the time left.
Cool. Thanks. Lost childhood messages. So link in your mind back. Each of those heart wounds implicitly contains this. It's a, your heart is dying because you've witnessed a lack of fairness and safety as an 8. So the lost childhood message is you can trust. So 8s grow up not feeling that they can trust. They're going to be betrayed. And guess what? Their whole ego style is mitigating against that possibility. You can't betray an 8 because they've already judged you as a threat and they're defending against you before you've even done anything. It's called false prejudice. So that's the lie of the 8, is false prejudice. So we've got lies and traps and everything to reinforce this whole story. So if you just read around these lost childhood messages, 9s, that sense of the shattered heart and the withdrawal, the missing thing is your presence matters. So if you look around this, we don't need to go around them one by one. I've already mentioned them in the one wound of the grief-stricken heart. The grief is that I'm not good. I'm not seen as good. I'm not validated as good. I'm seen as defective and bad. So I'm going to have to work my entire life to prove that I'm not defective and bad, and I'm very scared that I might be. So each of these, the 2, you are wanted. If you experience not really being wanted, then it's okay, how am I going to be wanted? So you can see these messages are absolutely directly linked to the heart wound, an outcome of the heart wound, or an interpretation of the heart wound. So if my heart has had to die because I've witnessed violence, betrayal, or injustice, the message that I then craft around the world is, I can't trust anybody. And that then informs my strategy. So these, I'm going to leave you to read these and you're going to get the slides. But I also want to make the link here of these then, the ones on the top are called the avoidances. So it's another Enneagram: anti-self-action, trap, lies, avoidance. So you can see if I'm working with 8 here, if your last childhood message is you can trust. So okay, I can't trust anybody. I better avoid weakness and vulnerability. If my needs aren't going to be met as a 7, I'm going to go all out in my life to avoid pain and deprivation. So notice for your own type, the link. We just did the heart wound. You're sitting with that feeling in your heart. The interpretation from that wound is the lost childhood message. And then, okay, what do I need to avoid here? And that's my strategy is built around that avoidance. Any comments there? Renata, is there anything you want to say about the structure and the flow? And then people can ask questions about these messages.
No, Ing, I think just to reiterate what you've already said, and I love that you've grouped them in different colors, that for 8, 9, and 1, you know, the core of that is around, you know, control, and there's some core issues around anger there. And for 2, 3s, and 4s, the core issues are shame and self-esteem. You can see the lack of self-esteem there, which is often very difficult to see in 2, 3s, and 4s. People are shocked to hear, you know, my 8 friends just kind of like, if they hear my lack of self-esteem stuff, if they're close enough to me to get to see that, they're like, what the hell is that? They completely don't relate to it. But you see the self-esteem, shame, and the sadness in the heart center in the 2, 3s, and 4s. And then for 5, 6s, and 7s, the need for safety and security as sitting at the core there. And how, you know, for me, sitting in the heart center, I don't relate to people with fear issues. When I hear that stuff from my daughter, you know, the car door's locked and does the electric fence work, I'm like, what is that? Like, who thinks like that? And it's one of the many ways that the Enneagram helps us understand how we misunderstand each other. When I see that anger stuff and control stuff in the body center, 8, 9s, and 1s, I'm like, good heavens, what's going on there? So a lot of our judgments come from our misunderstanding of what we're all striving for. Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks. And also I want to add something around the gut center, control and autonomy, like having agency in the world. But I like that you've highlighted again the core underlying feeling of each of the centers. So we kind of cluster the wounds. Anyone else want to say something about this or give an interpretation, ask a question? Getty, are you going to say something? Kevin.
I've always associated security as a 6 quality. You have it listed as 5, and I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say more about why you put security at 5 instead of at 6? Safety is at 6 here, I see, and it's making me think.
Won't you go into your thoughts a bit? Because as a 5, I'm sure, can you explain why you like it? And then maybe I can add an interpretation.
Yes, because if my needs are seen and I'm not putting anyone out, right? From my perspective of avarice, there's never enough, or I have to hold on to what I have to keep it from being wasted so that there will be enough in the future. That might be razor blades or food in the cabinet. Clearly it's razor blades, right? But I see this message of your needs are not a problem, as in, if I run out, it will be okay. And that provides a deep feeling of security for me, that if the people in my inner circle are saying, if you run out, it doesn't matter, we have enough, for you too. That's very important. See, I'm even quivering in my voice as I'm talking about it. That does resonate and strike very deep.
That is very, very helpful. Thank you. So it's like I've basically got to meet my own needs, is what I'm hearing you say. That life is unsafe, I better meet my own needs. So that's the internal. So now I'm understanding the internal conflicted external. So the 5 is I'm going to meet my own needs. The 7 is I better fricking get my needs met somehow. And the 6 is not really knowing how to get my needs met.
It also explains to me this thing about your needs are not a problem, why 5s have got it, they make an art of getting by with very little for themselves, because they've learned that the fewer needs I have, the better. And so they've kind of like make sure that they keep their needs to a minimum.
Yes, absolutely. That's that whole kind of monastic archetype of being very frugal, the kind of Spartan. I know my son is a 5, he's hilarious. He's like, when he was 23 and you ask him, what do you want for your birthday? He says, a pair of socks. No, I mean, it's absurd. Yeah. Anything else you want to add there, Kevin? Like what's landing for you as a 5 around that stuff? Is there anything else you want to say?
I always look at the direction of stress and growth anytime I see, something put around the Enneagram. And so for me, really, I didn't notice this until just now, but the message for 7 is your needs will be met, which is resonating as well. Your needs are not a problem. Your needs will be met. And that would be, a missing piece as I move up to the fact that I can trust that my needs will be met. So there's a real whole picture there. I don't think I would have come to that conclusion that is a security-based experience for a 5.
That's yes. Yeah. So look down your line of integration here and see what the message would be when you integrate. So for 7 going to 5, it's that my needs matter and they're not a problem, and I'm not going to starve. So for 8 is you can trust, and you can trust that your needs will be met. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In that link.
Yeah, very much so. And And that is about, I would have put, I would have put trust and security as a 6 quality. How interesting that it's not just, it's just a bit different than I've thought about it in the past.
It's helpful. But if you look at the Gottman Institute and Harville Hendricks and that whole ontological model of relationship, they say that there are 2 fundamental needs in relationship, and one is safety and one is connection. So, you're highlighting that connection for me in what you're saying. Is that there are a number of different ways of feeling safe, and there are a number of different ways of feeling connected. And the Enneagram is just like a kaleidoscope of those 2 things in a way.
Yeah, I almost looked at security at 6 as something I don't experience very much of, and now it's hitting me in a different way. It's not a, it's equally important to me, you know, even though I'm not a 6, I have a 4-wing. I don't need security, right? I got it. I'm okay. I have enough. I can be strong on my own. That's how the message has hit me before, and now it's not. It's hitting differently now. Very cool. Thank you.
Cool. That's so great. I love it when we walk away with these subtle shifts that open up a whole lot of new space for inquiry. And I'm just testing your hypothesis now, or your insight. Like if I think about you are special for the 4, 4s don't get any sense of special. But then when they go up to the line of 1, they're going to feel an intrinsic goodness. So,
Ing, I just want us to be conscious that people are saying their goodbyes in the chat. So let's complete, and then if anybody does want to stay on a bit and ask questions and chat a bit, Ingrid and I will stay for as long as we're able to.
I just, before you sign off, if you haven't already, give some comments in the chat about how you found it, just points out of 10 or something. I just like to get feedback on how the session was.
And thanks everybody for coming. And hope to see you again soon. We've got a session on Friday night coming next week, Friday. I'll be presenting on polarity in the Enneagram. The Enneagram is all about polarity or duality, and our journey from duality to non-duality. And for those that have seen the talk, it is the same talk. So don't come if you've been before. Just we haven't done it on that timeline.
So cool.
Yeah, so thanks everybody, and please do leave a rating and a comment for Ingrid. Feedback is gold. And Ingrid, from all of us, darling, wow, the way that you research and collate and present and put this wisdom together for us in an accessible format is such an incredible gift. Thank you, and just love you from my heart for your generosity that you give to the community. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cool. So anyone ask anything?
Craig?
Craig, yeah. Yeah, so I really like that last slide that Kevin highlighted. And when I look at myself as an 8, from the trust and then going along the lines to wanted and security, it resonates with me. When I try, I mean, there's a little everybody's got a bit of everybody in them, but my tri-type is 837, and that resonated earlier with what you were saying. And on this one here as well, particularly along the lines of integration. Yeah, it makes me feel a little bit more comfortable. So thank you.
836. So just as an experiment for you and maybe for each of us, in your tri-type, like if you were to feel you can trust, you are loved for yourself and your needs will be met, that would be like the medicine for you.
Yes, yeah, and also my line of stretch and release as well. So there you see, here's my gluttony because I've got a 7 wing. I want all this stuff for myself. But you know what I'm saying? 837.
And just like Richard Rohr says if you could see the world through all 9 types, you would see through the eyes of God. So if you were to experience all these things, if all these lost messages were suddenly true, you would be in Satchitananda, you would feel utter bliss.
Yeah, but you see, that speaks to my lust for innocence, that bliss.
That purity, hey? It's like holy truth, non-dual, yeah, no separation.
Beautiful.
So I'm just thinking, like, if we look at our tri-types, so for me, your needs will be met, 7, your presence matters, 9, and you are special, 4. Like, look at your own tri-type and see if that's the kind of medicine for you.
It's like a prescription from a doc.
The Enneagram's full of prescriptions. So it's a very prescriptive system. It really is.
Ingrid, this is Susan.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm curious on like the deep trauma of COVID. You know, I was feeling some real changes in me and what was coming up. And I actually worked with Lucille a little bit on that a little bit last year because it was interesting. And I still feel that in some aspects. What would you, any thoughts on with that kind of systems impact and the energy that was just rolling out from COVID on a personal level and every, you know, and more, what impacts may that have had on our types and what showed up? Because I was feeling some major changes from that deep within.
Mm. We actually had a session, an Euphoria supervision session early on about type-specific responses to COVID that addressed exactly that question, like how are we triggered into our shadow defense mechanisms? How do we cope with this level of trauma, uncertainty, and each type responding to that in different ways? I think generically we're going to go down our line of stress, we're going to go down in the levels of health, and you know, I mean that would be my high level guess. But we did speak quite a lot about the defense mechanisms, that those are the ones that kicked in.
And I did feel that, and I felt some actual instinctual change. So it's not just going to, because I'm a social 2, and I really went to 8, but I really went to 8 and was looking at disintegration or integration, you know, and what is this about, but really feeling instinctual, some different things showing up. So that maybe, I don't want to take up time, you know, necessarily with this, but I'd be, you know, interested in that former talk, what may show up or whatever, but was very interested in what was happening with me and to see, you know, then, you know, how that may be with others. So, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that instinctual thing, because one of the things Oranio Paez teaches is that our repressed instinct bursts through under stress. About that for a second, how your instinctual stacking didn't look anything like before.
Excellent. Okay. Yes, that was interesting because I did a test. I did a different Enneagram test, and my repressed instinct came up as my dominant. And I was like, this has never showed up before. So thank you for that. That was interesting. And that's again, when it comes to these type tests in type, you know, to keep seeing what resonates and such, and a test is not the end all, you know, and, you know, it's a framework. and what else is there? So thank you. Yeah.
Lots of teachers who say you mustn't ever do a test. I don't know if you know Douglas Rosestone. He's been working with the Enneagram for God knows how long. He says never ever take a test. Naranjo said you mustn't take a test because part of the psychospiritual journey is discovering these things within yourself. And that's a very important part of the process. So I really like that. And when clients don't know their type or their subtype, you can spend 3 months with them going through and reading about the subtypes and talking and testing. And there's incredible value in that self-inquiry process, just as an aside. But I'd like to hear a little bit more from you on why this instinctual point makes sense to you, that the repressed burst through. Can you speak to that a bit? And then Renata's got a something.
I just, before anybody says anything, I'm traveling tomorrow. I have to run. Usually I stay for hours afterwards, but I have to go. I've made you host, so I'm going to sign out and the session will continue. Love you all madly. Thanks for coming. Come again. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, cool. So Susan, look us through that repressed breaking, if it's real.
Well, what was my repressed was the sexual, the one-on-one. And, what was happening for me last year was that one of the things I do besides, the work with the Enneagram and coach and facilitating is I co-own and steward a retreat center in the Asheville area. And so it was just, we were retreat centers. Our business was struggling and I was trying to navigate and pivot this. And I love the land. It's a nature, environmental focus. And it's always been part of, very energetic, drawn to this. But so for me, when I looked at that, because I think sexual can be towards, not that sexual energy towards a thing, towards something. And so that's what came up for me was in my focus of trying to save and trying to pivot and trying to love well, on limited resources and everything, was around this land, was around this place, and all of that. I mean, that's what it, so that's what it came on to me, that one-on-one kind of experience and feeling. We were in the process of building a house too, attached to the land. So it was like, is this right? Is this wrong? What do we do? All that. But my action energy, I mean, it was just, because sometimes, I would take my time and all this, and my action energy was all about these things, these things that I cared about. And I really withdrew though from like social media and social systems and all of that, because it was very much on preserving my energy. It was like managing my energy, and I was in overwhelm. Overwhelm came up for me a lot, last year, as dealing with all of this. So that's just what came up for me as to why that may have typed that way on the instincts. But because my 8 energy was just huge. And actually it still is there, because my husband and my kids say, and I think they're 6s, my husband is a 6, is that when I walk in they can feel my energy, it's that external energy, and I was really speaking up on a lot of things. I was becoming very direct. I had very direct conversation, this is it. I didn't have that people pleasing, that really changed, I felt, a lot for me. And I keep checking in. It's like, okay, does this feel true, on what that's, what is that about? So just, really, I have my voice, just whether people wanted it or not, really became a lot stronger. And I try to hold that well, but, on what I'm speaking to, and right and wrong, all that. So that was part of what happened last year, and I'm still there. I mean, I feel that deep change.
And I keep on saying, this is 2020, the sequel. everyone thought there was a threshold between last year and this year. And then we were pushing to the end, and we got to the end and there's no end. So I'm hardly surprised that it's still here, because we're in the same. But I just wanted to highlight for people that don't know that when we go down the line of stress, we go within our subtype. So if you're a sexual 7, when you get triggered, you're going to go to sexual 1. So your anger is going to take the form of the sexual 1. So if you're a social 8, your repressed instinct comes up, which is the sexual. It's going to express like a sexual 8. So I would imagine, if I were to guess what your 8ishness looked like, is very rebellious, very fiery, very domineering, not necessarily the us and them version of the social 8, which goes into justice and a kind of a very much us and them type of stance. But if your sexual, what repressed was coming out, and then you went to the sexual 8, I would imagine that very fiery tasting. Sexual 8s like to taste their loved ones a lot. Can you take me? Can you stand up for me? Does that ring true at all?
I'm not sure. I'm going to have to sit with that. We experienced a lot from the business sense of, experiencing, and I think there was that scarcity mentality that was showing up in a lot. So, people who were doing things like on our team that did not feel good, So I think that right and wrong, I felt the one wing coming. I felt the one energy coming up for me, that this is not right. And I felt great protection of, what would happen on the land with COVID. And even if other people weren't trying to follow the protocols and such, I was. So, it was an 8 and with a strong 1, and it was about protection and right and wrong, if that makes sense. This is just what was coming up. Yeah. Yeah.
I would interpret that control, though, as also part of 8, because 8's the lust. The vice of lust is actually not sexual lust, it's domination. So, you control the agenda. I know my sister as an 8, when COVID hit and lockdown happened, she went into full-on domination of everyone in her family. She started assigning tasks. She started becoming the super, field marshal of the household. So it was a very dominating energy, not so much about the rules of the 1 and the perfectionism, but domination. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure. One of the things I didn't mention that was going on in parallel that may have had this is I was also dealing with my mother, who moved in with us for a period of time, who has paranoid delusions, manic. So I was dealing with that emotions and the systems. And I was, as you talk about heart wounds and things, it's really coming up and having to be with a maternal instinct in the seeds in a very, I had to be dominant. I had to, in order to keep her safe and tough love. And it felt very ugly at times, Anyhow, I don't want to get into all this, but it was feeling all these systems and these energies and how it was coming, coming up. So that in my systems also, the chaos, the chaotic chaos, chaos of someone else's emotional energy. So yes, so how I was having to step up, to all of that. I did have to be dominant. I did have to be more dominating. It did. Yeah. And it's still there. Yeah. Anyhow. Yeah.
What's arising for me while you're talking is the memory of the maternal wound in 8 is a kind of weak mother who didn't protect them. So there's the betrayal by the mother of not protecting them against the father type violence often. So a huge fury in 8 with the weak mother, and I'm not going to be like that. I'm going to be tough and strong. So just I don't want to impose that on you, but I know that that's part of the dynamic of 8. So I don't know if that's got any interest for you, relevance.
Yeah. And my father was my protector. So this is where, things don't always line up so well as what it goes to. So my father was a protector. So that was like, that feels much different in that energy. So this is where taking all of this, and as we listen to it, it's like, okay, and where does this fit, and where is it may not fit, and how it may show up in other areas. So anyhow, so I thank you for this, Ingrid. I feel like I've taken a lot of time.
It's fine.
Yeah, we'll be back.
To test, does this pattern fit? Another thing I just wanted to say about 8, I'm kind of stuck in that idea of the violent 8 father, but it's not that. It's about injustice and protection and safety. So I know from other 8s I've met, the father protected them from a harsh mother. So there is a maternal wound, but it's either that the mother was the brute, or the mother didn't protect them from the father brute. So the 8 is about an imbalance of power. I think that's the essence. It's not about the father being a bad guy, or you know what I mean. It's basically where's the power imbalance, and there's some kind of injustice. So if I don't want to misrepresent.
Yeah.
Can I just say something there as a type 8? That's me, Mary Wood.
There you are, Mary. I'm looking around the screen. Yeah.
So I'm a type 8 and had quite a complicated journey to discover my type. And I don't kind of show up necessarily behavior-wise as a typical 8. And I had to dig quite deep to look into that whole maternal wound thing, because I was very close to my mum. That was my most powerful relationship growing up, really, and have looked quite hard at what that meant for me personally. I can conjecture that I was an unplanned baby, and I think for the early stages of pregnancy, whatever kind of weight you give to those prenatal experiences, she struggled with me being pregnant again 10 years after my next oldest sibling. And I also know from discussions with her, because she was a nurse of the old school, and if there had been the tests available at the time, and there had been proved to be something wrong with me, she might not have continued with the pregnancy. So although when I was born and I was, an adored daughter after 2 sons, I've realized that I've carried that feeling that my life is fragile and hangs potentially by a thread, or hung potentially by a thread. But also it feels a very powerful thing to be Mary. It feels very powerful to be alive, to be me, to be who I am. And then because of the dynamics of my family, I sort of perceived that little Mary thought that my mum needed protecting in a household of men, and she and I were going to look after each other. So, the upshot of it was I was very, very close to her. And it was quite a journey to recognize that relationship was probably an unbalanced, possibly unhealthy one to a certain degree. So that's quite a complicated journey, but I sometimes feel defensive of 8. I guess we all feel that about our type, that we can be categorized. And I'm one of those, and it doesn't look like that for me.
What you've said is so profound and insightful and helpful, because what you've done is you've created a lot of depth and nuance and complexified. So we don't get stuck in one thing. You can hear I was stuck in the idea of the 8, the father's bad and the mother's a weak protector. It's not at all stuck like that. There's so many variations in the wounding to the feminine archetype. And as you're describing a different one, Lynn's described a different one. So it depends on the stories we've encountered as coaches. We sometimes get stuck in a particular example in our minds while we're talking. So I'm very grateful that you've done that, because you've disrupted that stuck picture. And while you were talking, I was thinking about this, the 8 as a rejection type. It's like a in utero rejection. So before you were born and your mother fell in love with you, which we all do with our babies, there was that thing of not wanting to be pregnant. And I mean, most healers that I've ever worked with, energetic or esoteric or spiritual in any way, and even just epigenetic studies, you know, that feeling of in utero rejection, people speak about how that's picked up and internalized by the baby. So if the 8 is a rejection type, I'm just like, the picture in my mind is, I know that I'm not wanted. I'm incredibly vulnerable. I could be terminated. So it's almost like toughening up in utero, anticipating and kind of experiencing some tacit rejection. That's kind of what's been going through my mind while you were speaking.
I always related to be a rejection type, you know, although I had to unpack that, I knew it resonated almost before I unpacked it. So, you know, so much of what you've said, I do agree with and relate to. And totally what you've said. Just wanted to add another dimension to it, really. Thank you. I'm very grateful you did. Thanks a lot. That's great. Thanks, Mary. And thanks for sharing like a very personal story. It also prompted me to ask, you know, we are sharing these things, and I upload these videos on YouTube, and I'm thinking this one I shouldn't, because quite a lot of us are sharing personal narratives, or maybe I should cut back to the end of the slides before I publish anything. Or maybe I shouldn't at all. So maybe I can get some comments in the chat of, you know, what you want me to do as far as posting a recording goes.
No, I'm having a thought, Ingrid. As you said that, I did start sharing a lot. So I'm feeling, it's mania. So I am feeling actually to have it sort of out there, just generally available, doesn't actually, I'm really thinking carefully. I'm being so foolish, just jumping in and
I also TMI, and there's no filter, and then it's like, oh dear, my personal brand is very badly compromised here.
Yeah. There you go.
Can I ask that? I mean, this has been so rich, and for me, I learn by repetition. I appreciate that, you know, we don't want to put it out on the web, but could you share it with those who have been here in this session, you know, so that I can go over it again and full process things again? I don't know how everybody else feels like that.
Brilliant. That's great. Yes. And then obviously there's a tacit agreement in saying that no one's going to share it externally. Okay.
Agreed.
No,
100%.
lots of stuff in the beginning. Sorry, Craig. Lots of stuff in the beginning that I also want to like go over. So I'd also like to hear that again, because there was lots of information in the beginning.
Okay, cool. I don't know whether this, what's it called again, Zoom, has any kind of record of who was here, but Renata has taken those screenshots, so we'll know. But if there isn't a record, can you guys just type your name into the chat so that I don't have to rely on Renata going through the photographs? Do you know what I mean? I just want to know, yeah. It just cuts out some of the work of seeing who needs to get the recording.
I can't.
Ingrid, it's Teresa here. Teresa Daniels. Hi, Ingrid. I think we had this conversation before when you about the in utero is the type formation in utero rather than, you know, the childhood wound. And I think I remember telling you my story about as a 9. My mother found out she was pregnant when my brother was like 3 or 4 months old, and she was on her own. She was she had my father, but my father was, you know, elsewhere, and it was like, I can't cope with another baby. And she was an Irish Catholic, so there wouldn't have been the thought of terminating, but it was like, I cannot cope with any more. And and then she had a visitation in one night, and for her it was St. Patrick, with her being an Irish Catholic, and it was, you will have a little girl, because she'd had 2 boys, and my eldest brother never slept, and things like that, and she'll be no trouble. You'll cope. She'll be a little girl, and she'll be no trouble. And so as a 9, it was like, always the childhood message was like, it's, do not put any, this is already full, this conflict at home, do not add 1 ounce to the scales. So it's just really interesting, because she told me that when she was about 89. It was a just completely random story that she came out with one day, that and she didn't know anything about the Enneagram, but after identifying with the 9, it was like different to Mary's. Again, lots of mothers are stressed in pregnancy because they've been abandoned, the fathers have gone or whatever. For my mother, it was just, I can't cope with any more workload. I can't cope with any more demands from anybody. So somehow, whether that, I just keep hearing it again and again, of now my friends in the Enneagram world saying, I've never told my child this, but this is how I felt when I was pregnant with them. So it's just an interesting development of that childhood wound, really. Because, when I think I was pregnant with my 2 children, I don't remember being under that same level of stress as maybe women were back in the 1950s and 60s, when, it was a lot tougher. But what, what is it that neural pathway in the baby is picking up when it's all being knitted together in the womb? It's interesting. And the other thing about your presence matters. When I first did Enneagram work as a 9, I thought your presence matters. And of course, being out of referenced, I thought, oh, your presence matters to others. Others do want you. It's important that you show up. And then, of course, I realized it didn't mean that at all. It means your presence matters. Your presence matters to you, me with me, my presence with me. That's what matters, that I don't delete myself again and merge with somebody else's agenda. So, that's when it really started making sense, because your presence matters really saying to 9s what they're always doing, which is your presence matters to others. So it was that sort of coming home to you, and your home within yourself, and your presence to you and your internal cosmos and your internal world is, it's your home that you need to be present to. And then that was a big leap then, because that's when the work could really start.
Profound. Wow. So you got the tacit message in utero is, I hope this one's not any trouble because I can't cope with more. So you had to be as little as possible, basically.
Yeah. And like you were saying, I've said this before, my home was just a normal working class home. My father down at the pub, my mum, no support and no money. But for me, it was, I've said it before, it was like Beirut. I mean, I would creep down the stairs, put my head around the stairs to see if I could cross the living room. And, that image is so strong and it's completely amped up. It was just, and when I've talked to my brothers about it, they don't remember the home being like that at all, So it's just that huge sensitivity, again, in the nervous system, for seeing conflict as something that was really, really unsafe, that just wasn't true. But certainly it was like, it's okay to be here, but there's no room.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. So it really helps us to understand self-deletion, that you have to.
You think you have to, yeah, for whatever as Mary said, for whatever nuance of the dynamic, you're entering into this dynamic system, aren't you? And you have to, so that self-deletion could be, and that's where I've been teaching this morning, and we've done a 4-panel, and I can see why so many 4s and 9s actually, how many 9s think they're 4s, because of that sadness of self-deletion, that terrible sadness that 9s have, that again isn't very well understood, and that's why so many 4s misidentify. But if you think, as you say, for a moment, the only way I can be accepted is to self-delete, and that's an incredibly sad thing to do to yourself. That's why your presence matters, is that starting to make, recreate with that love for yourself, so not with others. So but also what strikes me is when we get up into the virtues and the holy ideas, how there is less division. Those messages that you had on are very similar for all of us, aren't they? The divisions when we're in personality seem really stark between an 8 and a 9 and a 5. But as we get closer up, it's almost minimal. I could read any of those messages of the virtues, and they relate. We're sort of we're going up and up and up into we're getting into that oneness, aren't we? So the type structures that are important in personality become less important. So
so it's like fine-tuned distortions in a sense of safety and connection and belonging. It just takes a subtly different interpretation in each type, I think, is part of what I'm.
Yeah.
Another thing, like the 8, the 9, one of the 9 anti-self actions is that false accommodation. It's called false accommodation. So what a 9 would be doing is accommodating the needs of the system over self with a big S. Self-deleting, false accommodating, and they're just getting lost.
Yeah.